Cairo IV had been dying for 6 hours when the Minotaurs came through the smoke. The first warning the tyrant's legion received was not the shriek of descending engines, for the heavens had been screaming since before dawn beneath the passage of attack craft and the endless hammering of orbital guns. Nor was it the trembling of the mine fortifications, because the rockcrete bastions had shuddered without respite beneath impacts that had turned whole excavation districts into cratered fields of molten stone. The warning was simpler. The artillery stopped. Men who had spent the night praying for silence discovered, in the moment it came, that silence was worse. 46,000 soldiers had been ordered to hold the mining complexes in the name of the tyrant of Badab, packed into trenches cut through black slag, hab galleries carved beneath poisoned earth, and fortified processing works whose chimneys vanished into the ash clouds above. They had heavy bolters sighted along the extraction roads, autocannon emplacements covering the approaches, battle tanks concealed behind ore crushers, and enough ammunition to murder armies. They had been told that space marines were coming. Some had taken courage from that knowledge. Others had understood what it meant. The clouds opened in fire. Thunderhawks descended beneath curtains of chaff and burning debris, their armored hulls bronze beneath soot and heat distortion. Heavy bolters stitched the upper parapets with explosive shells, turning weapon crews into bursts of meat and cloth before the surviving gunners could traverse. Missiles struck the outer bastions a heartbeat later. Rockcrete slabs the size of hab blocks lifted from their foundations. Men disappeared inside clouds of pulverized masonry. The first Minotaurs were already dropping from assault ramps before the gunships had settled, enormous figures in bronze warplate, moving with a speed no mortal body possessed. Bolters rose as one. The first defensive trench ceased to exist as a fighting position. Mass reactive shells entered men through breastplates, shoulders and faces, then detonated in wet eruptions that sprayed the trench walls with blood, bone, and steaming organs. A legionary survived long enough to stare at the lower half of the man beside him, hanging from a firing step, before a second bolt entered beneath his jaw and burst the back of his skull across the ammunition lockers. The Minotaurs did not roar challenges. They did not proclaim themselves. Their vox traffic was clipped, battle cant, coordinates, ranges and kill confirmations transmitted between squads advancing beneath the thunder of their own guns. Vanguard formations struck the outer defenses and held them in place, while assault units descended beyond the flanks, severing the roads that led into the deeper mine galleries. Devastator squads occupied broken ridges where they could command the retreat routes. Armored engines crawled from landing craft in their wake, tracks crushing corpses into the volcanic mud, while autocannon and Lascannon fire reached over the advancing infantry. Every movement belonged to the next. Every sacrifice purchased another angle of fire. When a bronze-armored battle brother took an autocannon burst through the abdomen, his cuirass split apart, and a rope of dark transhuman viscera slapped against his thigh plate. He remained on one knee, firing his bolter until his magazine was empty. The warriors behind him stepped past without looking down. An apothecary would come if the advance permitted it. If it did not, the chapter would recover what could be recovered later. At Bastion Callist, the defenders held long enough to become troublesome. 3 concentric barricades guarded a command structure sunk into the side of an ore mountain, its weapon slits invisible beneath layers of armorcrete and slag. Heavy bolters hammered the approach. An autocannon tore a Minotaur apart at the waist, the force of the strike flinging his upper body against a burned-out carrier, while his legs remained standing for an absurd instant before collapsing. A Lascannon fired from the command tier and struck another Astartes squarely in the chest. Ceramite flashed white. The warrior vanished inside the glare and fell trailing smoke. The defenders cheered until the bronze giant behind him emerged from the furnace haze. Asterion Moloch advanced where the fire was heaviest. His armor was older in pattern and heavier in presence than the plate. Of the warriors around him, ornate Tartaros Terminator warplate wrought into the aspect of a walking executioner. The storm shield upon his arm bore the scars of battles whose names had been forgotten by men still living. In his other hand rested the black spear. Autocannon rounds struck the shield and exploded into showers of fragments. Heavy bolter shells battered against the layered ceramite of his pauldron and burst against the ground around his greaves. Moloch did not hurry. He moved with the terrible inevitability of a siege engine given human form, each stride carrying him closer, while the Terminators advancing in his shadow answered the bastion with stormbolter fire. A legionary officer screamed for the Lascannon to fire again. The weapon discharged. Moloch turned the shield at the instant of impact. Light swallowed him. The field generator screamed. The edge of the shield glowed red. He was still moving when the glare faded. The front barricade lasted less than a minute. A Terminator drove through it bodily, while another shattered the firing aperture beside him with repeated power fist blows. Legionaries fired until their weapons overheated, then drew blades and died with them in their hands. Moloch reached the command tier through a corridor so narrow his shoulder plates scraped sparks from the walls. A senior officer backed away from him, bolt pistol trembling despite both hands locked around the grip. He fired twice. One shell struck Moloch's breastplate. The other vanished into the darkness above his helm. Moloch thrust once. The black spear punched through the officer's sternum, passed through his spine, and continued into the command cogitator behind him. The man's torso folded around the haft. Moloch wrenched the spear free in a wash of blood and machine sparks. Another soldier lunged from the side with a demolition charge clutched against his chest. Moloch struck him with the storm shield. The impact crushed ribs, lungs, and heart together and hurled the corpse into the bulkhead, hard enough to leave it bent around the metal like butchered meat nailed to a shrine. A Minotaur captain entered through the smoke. His helm turned toward the tactical display still flickering above the ruined cogitator. The lower galleries are withdrawing, Lord. 6 battalions, perhaps more. They have prisoners and bonded mine serfs among them. The primary extraction machinery remains operational. Moloch looked once at the representation of the underground works. No anger touched his voice. Collapse them. The captain did not hesitate. The machinery will be lost. So will the ore. That was all. Demolition orders passed through the chapter net. Tech Marines and breacher squads had already placed charges against structural load points identified before the first landing craft entered atmosphere. The Minotaurs had not come to inherit Cairo's mines. They had come to remove them from Huron's war. Charges detonated beneath support towers and along subterranean galleries. The earth convulsed. Extraction towers leaned as if bowing before some unseen god, then folded into one another beneath clouds of black dust. Conveyor bridges collapsed across avenues crowded with retreating legionaries. A troop carrier vanished beneath thousands of tons of descending rockcrete, its crew compressed with such violence that blood sprayed from vision blocks before the hull disappeared entirely. Deep below, mine galleries failed in sequence. Men ran through darkness as the ceilings came down behind them. Servitors continued dragging ore carts until falling stone crushed them into machinery. Prisoners hammered uselessly at locked gates. Entire chambers became tombs in the span of heartbeats. Human voices swallowed beneath the grinding roar of a mountain being murdered from within. Some escaped. They clawed from ruptured access shafts white with dust, coughing mud and blood, faces stripped raw by fragments of stone. They emerged beneath a dead sun and found bronze-armored giants waiting in disciplined firing lines. Bolters spoke. Bodies burst. One man lost an arm and half his chest, yet continued crawling from the shaft, dragging a strand of intestine beneath him until a Minotaur put a single round through his skull. Another reached his knees and raised empty hands. The bolt struck between them and detonated inside his breastbone. There was no hatred in the execution. No laughter followed it. The Minotaurs killed because resistance remained on. The battlefield had not yet been declared secure. The last organized counterattack came from the Western Processing Quarter. A Lehman Russ battle tank burst through a wall of broken ore hoppers, with its engine howling and its armor blackened by ash. Its battle cannon fired almost immediately. The shell struck the street ahead of Moloch and erased 2 Minotaurs beneath a bloom of fire, stone, and shredded ceramite. The shockwave hammered against his Terminator plate. Warning runes ignited across his helm display. Shrapnel rattled from the shield. The tank's hull weapon began firing, heavy bolter rounds churning the roadway into fountains of dust and meat. Moloch moved behind the remains of an ore hauler as another cannon shell struck the wreck. The machine lifted from the ground and came apart above him. The tank advanced through the debris to finish what it believed it had killed. Moloch emerged beneath its gun arc. For something encased in Terminator armor, his acceleration was obscene. He crossed the final distance while the turret tried to traverse, one massive tread chewing through the remains of a fallen Minotaur. The hull gunner fired. Moloch took the burst on his shield and drove himself against the tank's flank. The black spear entered an engine grill near the rear quarter and punched through weakened armor into the machinery beyond. Moloch twisted the weapon with both hands. Metal screamed. Burning lubricant washed around the spearhead. The engine coughed black smoke, and the tank lurched sideways. Mark! A Minotaur anti-armor team fired from the ruins. The melter blast struck the breach Moloch had opened. Armor ceased to behave as solid matter. The rear quarter glowed, sagged, and then erupted outward as fuel and ammunition ignited inside the hull. Moloch withdrew the black spear and turned his shield toward the explosion. The turret tore free and crashed across the roadway. One crewman emerged through the command hatch already burning, his uniform fused to his skin. He fell from the vehicle screaming and rolled across the rubble until a bronze boot descended upon his neck. By nightfall, there was almost nothing left on Cairo worth defending. Mine mouths burned beneath collapsed mountains. Processing towers lay across dead avenues. Rail lines had been cratered at intervals, calculated to make repair ruinously expensive. Munition stores were detonated. Surviving armored vehicles were destroyed where they stood. Bodies lay so thick in several trench networks that Minotaur boots no longer touched the ground. 46,000 soldiers had entered the campaign as a garrison. What remained of their formation no longer possessed a meaningful command structure, supply system, or defensive purpose. Cairo was not conquered. It was rendered useless. There was no victory feast. Aboard the Minotaur's command vessel, the Strategium smelled of incense, hot metal, and antiseptic. Hololithic casualty columns rotated above a black marble table, while servitors crawled through maintenance channels beneath the deck. Tech Marines stood over damaged suits of warplate, chanting Binharic petitions as they removed fused armor segments from wounded battle brothers. Elsewhere, apothecaries worked without ceremony. Progenoid glands were cut from the dead with practiced precision. Gene seed canisters were sealed and marked. Mortal serfs dragged bronze-armored corpses from the receiving bay upon reinforced grav sleds while the living stepped around them. Moloch stood before the casualty display. Numbers changed, armor losses, ammunition expenditure, gene seed recovered, gene seed unrecovered, vehicles requiring forge attention, brothers fit to return to battle, brothers unlikely to rise again. He showed no satisfaction. One officer reported the final destruction of the Cairo extraction network. Another confirmed the tyrant's legion garrison no longer presented organized resistance. Moloch listened, then dismissed both with a gesture. The dead had purchased the required result. Nothing further needed to be said. An encrypted transmission entered the Strategium under inquisitorial seal. The sigil of Legate Inquisitor Jarndyce Frayne resolved above the table before dissolving into tactical data. The pale stars appeared as cold points of light surrounded by movement predictions, convoy routes, and astropathic intercepts. The Lamenters chapter had been fighting hard, harder than their allies had any right to demand. Their strength had diminished through repeated engagements and convoy actions. Their formations were increasingly separated from the greater forces serving the tyrant of Badab. Their vessels moved in patterns shaped as much by obligation as strategy. Moloch read everything. The intelligence included assessments of temperament. The Lamenters remained reluctant participants in the broader rebellion. They had shown hesitation where other secessionists had embraced slaughter. They still regarded many Imperial Space Marines as estranged brothers rather than enemies deserving annihilation. Their oaths had bound them to Huron. Their conscience had prevented them from becoming what Huron increasingly required. One Minotaur commander looked toward Moloch. They still believe restraint has virtue. Moloch's helm was held beneath one arm. His face might have been carved from old stone. Then restraint is exploitable. The officer inclined his head. The hololith shifted again. A vessel appeared above the strategium table, rendered first as a grainy auger silhouette, and then as a reconstructed tactical image. Vast, ancient, armored like a fortress built for the void. The identification rune burned beneath it. Mater Lacrimarum. The Lamenters' chapter bark was taking supplies in the Optera system. Intelligence marked wounded Astartes aboard. Chapter resources. Armory stores. Apothecarian reserves. Gene seed. Moloch remained silent for several seconds. He did not see a ship. He saw a chain. Wounded brothers were a chain. Gene seed was a chain. Honor was a chain. Loyalty was a chain. The Lamenters had wrapped themselves in all of them and called the burden virtue. Concentrate the chapter, Moloch said. The strategium changed at once. Fleet elements received encrypted orders. Strike cruisers altered readiness states. Armories opened. Servitors began loading boarding torpedoes and replenishing Thunderhawk magazines. Across the Minotaurs' vessels, bronze-armored warriors entered arming chambers without question. A fleet officer studied the bark's projected displacement. If we strike before reinforcement, Lord, concentrated lance fire should be sufficient to destroy her. Moloch looked at him. No. The word silenced the strategium. Cripple propulsion. Silence enough of her batteries to permit boarding. Leave her astropathic capability intact as long as possible. Understanding came slowly to the mortal officers, faster to the Astartes. The captain, who had ordered Cairo's galleries collapsed, turned toward the image of the Mater Lacrimarum. Bait. Moloch's eyes remained fixed upon the yellow icon suspended over Optera. They will come for their wounded. And their gene seed. They will come for both. No one asked what would happen when they did. Across the fleet, plasma drives brightened. Void shields rose. Magazine servitors carried fresh belts of ammunition into waiting gunships, while tech marines sealed damaged plate around warriors who had fought on Cairo only hours before. There were no hymns of triumph, no boasts, no promises of glory, only preparation. The Minotaurs turned toward Optera. Behind them, Cairo burned itself to death. Ahead waited brothers in yellow armor who still believed that brotherhood mattered. The Mater Lacrimarum had forgotten what peace sounded like. Even at rest, she groaned like a wounded leviathan, kilometers of ancient superstructure contracting around reactor heat, while armorers, engine seers, and chapter serfs labored within her iron anatomy. The bark had served the Lamenters for centuries as fortress, reliquary, armory, sanctuary, and tomb, and every deck bore the scars of that service. There were passageways where the original deck plating had been replaced so many times that no one living could say what lay beneath the last layer. There were shrines built around fragments of armor recovered from brothers who had died on worlds now absent from imperial charts. Their yellow ceramite faded beneath candle soot and the touch of generations. Black and white checkers marked archways, bulkheads, and reliquary doors, though in many places the paint had been worn nearly colorless by gauntlets and boots. The bleeding heart of the chapter appeared everywhere, carved into bronze lintels, painted across gun housings, cut into the stone of chapels where battle brothers knelt before deployment. On the surgical decks, there were no candles. There was white lumen. Glare, the stench of cauterized flesh, the antiseptic tang of medici compounds, and the steady mechanical hiss of respirators built for bodies far larger than those of ordinary men. Apothecaries moved between slabs, where wounded Lamenters lay with plates removed and blackened flesh exposed. Servo arms cut through fused ceramite. Surgical saws opened rib cages built not like those of men, but like dense shields of ossified bone. Gene seed canisters stood inside armored reliquaries beneath guard, each one representing not merely a dead warrior, but the possibility of a warrior yet unborn. The chapter had paid for those canisters in blood enough to drown cities. Veteran Sergeant Imano of the 7th Company moved through the apothecarian without speaking. He walked with the slight rigidity of a warrior whose armor compensated for injuries not entirely healed, though no mortal observer would have noticed it. The pain in his left hip came only when he shifted weight beyond a particular angle. The ache beneath his lower ribs had become so constant that he had ceased regarding it as pain at all. A fragment of alien metal, removed years before, had left scar tissue threaded around muscle and organ. The Medicae servitors had suggested further reconstruction. Imano had refused. There had been another war waiting, and after that another. There was always another. His war plate had been stripped for repair, and he wore a simple black undertunic marked with the chapter sigil over the heart. Without his armor, the full extent of his age was more visible. His face was lined by old scars. One ear was little more than a knot of reconstructed flesh. His scalp bore the pale tracks of sutures from injuries whose memory had become indistinct. He had served long enough to see brothers promoted, broken, interred within dreadnought sarcophagi, and reduced to names inscribed upon walls. He had also served long enough to know that the Lamenters were cursed with survival, almost as surely as they were cursed with tragedy. A wounded battle brother lay upon a slab near the center of the chamber, while an apothecary removed a shattered pauldron from his shoulder. The plate had once been yellow. Now it was blackened, cratered, and wet with blood beneath the rim. The brother's breathing was slow. His secondary heart had compensated for damage to the first, but blood still gathered in the channels cut around the table. Imano stopped beside him. "How many?" he asked. The apothecary did not look up. From the last convoy action, 12 dead beyond recovery, 7 progenoids secured from the fallen, 5 lost with the bodies, 19 brothers remain under treatment, 4 will not return to battle soon. That means they will return to battle late. If fortune permits. Imano regarded him. The apothecary's expression remained unreadable beneath the lenses of his half-helm. "Forgive me, Sergeant. Habit. No lamenter should invoke fortune without expecting punishment." The wounded warrior opened one eye and managed the ghost of a smile. "Then perhaps we should invoke victory instead." Imano placed a hand against his uninjured shoulder. "That word has cost us more than fortune ever did." There was no bitterness in the exchange, or perhaps there was so much that bitterness had become another form of brotherhood. The armory decks below were louder. Servitors moved in endless processions beneath racks of bolters and chainswords, their flesh grafted into lifter rigs and ammunition cradles. Magazines were inspected, blessed, and sealed. Bolt rounds were counted by type and batch before being issued to squads, each mass-reactive shell stamped with the sigils of Manufactoria and Armory. Tech Marines supervised the replacement of ceramite plates, while machine oil and incense thickened the air. A chainsword without 3 teeth lay disassembled beneath a servo rig. Nearby, an armorer tested the field generator of a power weapon, while another calibrated an inferno pistol so ancient that its casing carried inscriptions older than several imperial sectors. Such relics were rare among the chapter. The Lamenters were fleet-bound, and a fleet-bound chapter learned quickly that glory could not replace spare parts. Bolters could be repaired almost anywhere that possessed a competent forge. Standard pattern plate could be cannibalized and rebuilt. Exotic weapons demanded components that might take decades to replace. The chapter therefore cherished the relics it possessed especially those tied by tradition to the bloodline of Sanguinius, but it did not confuse reverence with practicality. Beyond the armory, launch bays yawned into the void behind armored shutters and flickering void screens. Thunderhawks rested in maintenance cradles beneath scaffolds, crowded with serfs and tech marines. One had its engine housings entirely open, exposing ducts and turbines blackened from repeated atmospheric insertion. Another bore fresh patchwork along the starboard wing, where enemy fire had torn through armor and killed 2 members of its crew. Storm ravens were suspended from overhead gantries like predatory birds awaiting release. Fuel lines ran from their bellies. Servitors loaded ammunition into weapon housings. The Lamenters had always favored violence delivered rapidly and at close quarters, the hard shock of assault craft breaking open a defense before the enemy could shape a response. Boarding actions, aerial insertions, concentrated assaults against critical points. These were tools they understood. Imano had entered hostile vessels through boarding torpedo breaches, narrower than the width of his own shoulders. He had fought through hangars, where atmosphere froze across the walls. He had seen Thunderhawks return with half their crews dead and engines burning, only to be repaired and launched again before the blood had dried inside the troop bays. The chapter survived because everything was used until it could no longer be repaired. Men were no different. The strategium of the Mater Lacrimarum had been built to make war across systems. A circular hololithic display occupied its center, surrounded by command stations, vox shrines and augur consoles, tended by mortal serfs whose families had served the chapter for generations. Malakim Foros stood before the hololith with his officers. He wore his armor, though he had removed his helm. Yellow plate caught the cold blue light of the projection. His face was harder than Imano remembered from decades before, if memory could be trusted. Foros had always possessed a severity that sat strangely beside the bleeding heart upon his shoulder. He was no mystic and no dreamer. He understood war as expenditure and obligation. He understood that the Imperium could praise a chapter in one century and condemn it in the next. He understood, perhaps better than most, that the Adeptus Terra did not forgive independence when obedience was available. "The southern approaches continue to bleed us," one captain said. "The tyrant has withdrawn formations again. Convoy security falls to us, while his stronger elements consolidate elsewhere." Another officer's jaw tightened. "We swore to stand with him. We swore before this became what it is." Foros looked toward the speaker. "Say what you mean." The captain did not look away. "I mean that an oath made to defend the rights of the Maelstrom Warders has become an oath used to shield Huron's ambitions. I mean that we are spilling Astartes' blood against warriors we once named brothers. I mean that the Administratum already writes the word traitor beside our name, whether we accept it or not." Silence settled across the strategium. Imano stood at the rear with several veteran sergeants. He had heard the argument before in different forms. None of them had an answer that did not taste of ash. Foros spoke at last. "Do you believe us traitors?" "No, Lord." "Do you worship forbidden powers?" "No." "Have you renounced the Emperor?" The captain's expression hardened. "Never." "Then do not surrender our name merely because others misuse it." Foros turned back to the hololith. "We entered this war because an oath bound us. We questioned the justice of distant masters who demanded obedience without understanding the burden carried by the warders. Those facts remain facts simply because the war has become ugly." "It has become more than ugly," another officer said. "The astral claws have changed." Foros's eyes moved toward him. "And when proof becomes certainty, we will judge them, not before. Until then, we honor what we swore." Imano understood the decision, even as he hated it. That was the oldest cruelty of duty. A coward could abandon an oath the instant it became painful. A fool could keep one after its purpose had rotted away. Honor required knowing the difference, and the universe rarely offered enough truth to make the distinction clear. A Vox Servitor, interrupted with a burst of machine code. One of the mortal augur officers stiffened. Lord Foros, Picket Vessel Sorrow's Vigil reports drive emissions beyond the outer survey limit. Identification? None confirmed. Strength? The officer hesitated. The return degraded before classification. Interference? Possible. The system remains saturated with wreck traffic, old mining beacons and residual emissions. Foros frowned, but did not reach for his helm. Order the picket to confirm and maintain distance, the Vox officer transmitted. Seconds passed. No response came. Imano felt something old tighten beneath his ribs. Another attempt went unanswered. Could be raiders, a captain said. Could be a reactor fault, another offered. Could be nothing. Imano looked toward the tactical display. Nothing rarely stops answering its Vox. Foros glanced back. Sergeant, I request permission to return 7th Company veterans to readiness. You expect an attack? I expect misfortune. A few officers allowed themselves thin smiles. Foros did not. Granted. Imano inclined his head and left. The apothecarian alarms began before he reached the arming decks, though not the alarms he expected. A Medici servitor announced neurological distress in a recovery ward. Imano entered to find 3 apothecaries restraining the wounded brother he had spoken with earlier. The warrior's muscles had locked so violently that restraint arms bent beneath the strain. Blood ran from his reopened wounds. His eyes were wide, but did not see the chamber. No, the wounded Lamenter whispered. The apothecary pressed an injector into his neck. The brother tore one arm free. No, father. Imano stopped. The wounded Marine's head turned towards something that was not there. His face changed. Not pain. Horror. He comes, he whispered. The traitor comes. One apothecary looked toward Imano. Brother, Imano said, stepping closer. You are aboard the Mater Lacrimarum. You are among your kin. The warrior stared through him. Golden, he breathed. He was golden. Imano's blood became ice. Every son of the bloodline knew the stories. Every successor knew the wound carried from the death of Sanguinius, though some chapters bore it differently, and some pretended they did not bear it at all. The Lamenters had spent generations believing their curse muted, lessened, perhaps even escaped. History had punished that pride, as it punished every other. The apothecary increased the sedative. The wounded brother began screaming the name of Horus. Imano watched until consciousness finally left him. Put him under guard, he said. The apothecary's voice was low. He is wounded. So was our father when he died. No one answered. Imano reached the armory moments before the universe tore itself open. There was no warning siren, no vox call, no final augur confirmation. A lance strike hit the stern. The Mater Lacrimarum moved beneath his feet with such violence that Imano was thrown into an armor rack, hard enough to buckle the metal frame. Lumen strips died. Emergency lamps ignited red. A heartbeat later, another impact rolled through the hull, deeper and heavier, followed by the distant thunder of secondary explosions. Gravity vanished. Servitors, weapons and serfs rose from the deck. One mortal armorer struck the overhead gantry head first. His skull burst against the steel, blood spreading in a red sphere around the drifting corpse. A servitor collided with a rack of bolt magazines, tearing loose fuel lines and machine cables. Imano caught a stanchion with one hand and hauled himself toward his waiting armor. "Seal the deck!" he roared. The void alarm began. Somewhere far astern, torpedoes struck. The first punched through armor near the maneuvering thrusters and detonated inside maintenance galleries. The second crossed damaged plating and vanished into the engine complexes. The third exploded against void shielding already collapsing beneath lance fire. Each impact transmitted through the bark's bones as a different kind of agony. Serfs locked Imano into his plate with desperate speed. His cuirass closed around him. Power feeds connected. Auto senses awakened. Tactical runes flooded his vision. Damage reports came with them. Stern batteries offline. Port maneuvering thrusters crippled. Primary drive output falling. Multiple atmosphere breaches. Launch deck casualties. Power failure. Across 7 sectors. Imano seized his bolter and slammed a fresh magazine home. The chapter vox erupted around him. Foros's voice cut through it. All companies to battle stations. Damage control prioritize propulsion. Launch-ready craft disperse immediately. Augurs, identify the attacker. The bark shook again. This time Imano remained standing. On the strategium, Foros watched escape vectors disappear one by one from the hololithic display as crippled drives reduced the enormous vessel's options. The attackers were not firing for the command deck. They were not striking randomly. They were carving away mobility with surgical violence. The augur master shouted across the bridge. Identification confirmed. A sigil appeared above the hololith. Bronze, a bull's head. For the first time since the attack began, Foros went completely still. "The Minotaurs," one of his captains said. Foros stared at the symbol. "No," he said quietly, "not merely the Minotaurs." His officers looked toward him. He understood what the pattern of fire meant. He understood the crippled drives, the preserved command systems, the deliberate refusal to finish the wounded vessel. "They want us alive." On the armory deck, Imano received a new Auspex feed from the outer hull sensors. For a moment his display filled with static. Then the returns resolved. Boarding torpedoes. So many that the machine spirit began grouping them into clusters rather than presenting individual runes. Imano looked across the armory at the yellow-armored warriors sealing helms, locking chainswords to mag clamps and chambering bolt rounds. His squad waited for him. "Brothers," he said. The first boarding alarm began to toll through the ancient ship. Deep, slow, funereal. "They have come inside our walls." The second toll sounded as bronze icons closed across the Auspex. Imano raised his bolter. "Make them regret it." The first boarding torpedo struck the Mater Lacrimarum while her starboard batteries were still firing. For several seconds, the void around the ancient chapter bark ceased to resemble emptiness and became instead a furnace crowded with death. Macro shells passed between opposing fleets in incandescent procession, each one a mass of metal and explosive force hurled across thousands of kilometers by guns whose loading chambers were larger than hab blocks. Lance beams burned through darkness without visible passage, existing only as instantaneous scars of white radiance between vessel and victim. The Mater Lacrimarum's void shields flared beneath successive impacts until the space around her hull shone like the corona of a dying star, layers of defensive energy buckling beneath torpedoes and concentrated batteries. A Lamenters escort vessel attempted to cross the bark's stern and screen the crippled drives. Minotaur fire found it before the maneuver was complete. The first macro shells tore open armor along its prow. A lance strike followed through the wound and passed down the vessel's length, gutting compartments in a line of plasma fire and ruptured atmosphere. The escort opened from prow to stern. Thousands of tons of plating peeled outward. Air, bodies, deck machinery, ammunition lockers and burning debris poured into the void in a glittering stream. Men died too quickly to know they had been killed. Frozen blood and oxygen crystals turning the wreck into a brief silver halo, while the broken ship continued upon its previous course through inertia alone. Around it, boarding torpedoes raced onward. Some vanished beneath point defense fire, turned into expanding clouds of armor, and pulped Astartes. Others passed through. Within the Mater Lacrimarum, veteran Sergeant Imano watched the compartment schematic update across his helm display and ignored the impact alarms screaming through his autosenses. He had selected the defense point himself, a longitudinal junction where 3 major corridors met before opening into a shrine gallery and maintenance spine. It was not sacred ground. That made it useful. The Minotaurs would expect the Lamenters to guard command decks, armories, the apothecarian, and the gene seed reliquaries with fanatic concentration, but a ship was killed as often through arteries as through hearts. If the invaders seized the junction, they would gain 3 routes inward and access to maintenance passages running parallel to the main decks. Imano had no intention of giving them that. Freedom. 4th and 5th positions, brace against the transverse wall, he ordered through the squad net. Brother Malak takes the rear with the heavy bolter. Do not waste ammunition on armor you cannot penetrate cleanly. Aim for gorgets, eye lenses, joints, crack grenades only when ordered. Yellow-armored figures moved without question. One battle brother knelt behind a fallen devotional plinth, bolter fixed across the broken icon of Sanguinius. Another sealed a pressure door at the far passage and set the locking cogitator to resist override. A third placed grenades within a maintenance recess and fed the detonator rune into Imano's tactical display. No one charged toward the breach. Boarding warfare punished eagerness. In a zone mortalis, courage without geometry was simply another name for a corpse. The second torpedo struck 3 decks below them. The third hit close enough to punch Imano sideways, despite his maglocks. Metal screamed through the ship's bones. A section of hull failed somewhere beyond the junction, and the atmosphere reacted with murderous immediacy. Wind became a hurricane. Shrine cloths tore from their hooks. Brass reliquaries skittered across the deck. A dead chapter serf flew through the corridor with his limbs flailing loose, struck a bulkhead hard enough to burst his skull, and vanished toward the breach. Emergency shutters descended, but failed halfway, twisted by the torpedo's impact. Red warning sigils multiplied across Imano's vision. "Brace," he said. His brothers lowered themselves, mag boots biting into the deck. The air thinned to a scream. Then came another sound, deep and metallic, vibrating through armor and teeth. Something enormous moved inside the decompressed compartment. The first Minotaur appeared through smoke and failing emergency lumens. He came through the broken shutter at a crouch, bronze plate scarred by the impact that had delivered him into the ship. Behind him followed another, then another, storm bolter muzzles and standard bolters rising as autosenses found targets. Imano fired first. His bolt struck the lead warrior at the neck seal and detonated beneath the gorget. Blood sprayed across the bronze breastplate in a dark fan. The Minotaur fell onto one knee, but did not die before the Lamenter's second volley hit him. His helm broke apart. Half his head disappeared. Fire. The corridor became a confined thunderstorm. Bolters hammered in overlapping volleys. Mass reactive shells crossed a distance measured in meters and struck with enough force to tear armor apart after penetration. A Lamenter beside Imano took a bolt through the left eye lens. The shell detonated inside his skull. Half his face and the rear of his head exploded across the wall behind him, bone and grey matter streaking the black and white checkers painted there. His armor remained upright for a single impossible heartbeat, locking around the dead body as though the machine spirit had not yet understood that its warrior was gone, then collapsed heavily onto the deck. A Minotaur forced himself through the fire and reached the devotional plinth. Brother Severin met him with a chainsword. The weapons did not clash like blades from some ancient heroic saga. Severin's chainsword bit into the Minotaur's forearm, teeth shrieking against ceramite, while bronze fragments and blood sprayed across both warriors. The Minotaur answered by driving a combat blade beneath Severin's ribs. Severin headbutted him hard enough to crack both faceplates, twisted his chainsword deeper, and severed the arm at the elbow. The Minotaur did not retreat. He rammed the knife farther in until the point emerged through Severin's backplate. Brother Chalice fired an Inferno pistol between them. At near contact range, the melter weapon turned the Minotaur's chest into an incandescent cavity. Ceramite glowed white, sloughed inward, and collapsed through vaporized tissue. The Minotaur died standing. The heat cooked Severin's blood, where it covered the bronze armor. Chalice dragged his wounded brother away, while the dead enemy toppled forward and struck the deck. More bronze warriors came. They did not pause at the sight of the dead. The first rank fell and became cover. Minotaurs behind them knelt between corpses and fired through gaps beneath arms and around shattered pauldrons. A wounded warrior, with only one functioning leg, dragged himself behind the body of a dead brother and continued shooting. A third element disappeared from Imano's frontal auspex entirely. That frightened him more than the visible assault. "Maintenance spine," he said. "They have the plans." Brother Malak swung the heavy bolter away from the main corridor. "Confirmed. Movement behind the port wall." The Minotaurs had studied the vessel before boarding. They were not merely pushing inward, they were shaping the fight. "Detonate Recess 3. A Lamenter thumbed the rune. The maintenance wall erupted inward. The charges had been intended to deny access. Instead, they caught 3 Minotaurs crawling through the service spine. One was torn apart across the torso, bronze armor splitting as the blast drove fragments through transhuman flesh. Another lost both legs below the knees and struck the opposite wall hard enough to crater it. The third came through the smoke still moving, one shoulder shredded open, and fired his bolter into Brother Malak's chest. The first round cracked yellow plate. The second entered. The third detonated behind the breastplate. Malak folded backward over the heavy bolter as blood and fragments of ribs sprayed through the feed assembly. Imano shot the wounded Minotaur twice in the face. "Fallback point 2, controlled withdrawal." No one questioned him. Lamenters moved by pairs, one firing while another displaced. The dead were not recovered. There was no time. The Minotaurs advanced into the space they abandoned, stepping over their own casualties and the Lamenters alike. Imano saw one bronze warrior pause only long enough to rip ammunition magazines from a corpse before moving on. Aboard the Minotaur's command ship, Asterion Malok watched the battle as intersecting lines. He stood before a hololithic projection of the Optera system, surrounded by rotating. "Third boarding wave has exceeded projected casualties," a captain reported. "Maintain deployment. One of the bark's primary drive manifolds is exposed. Lance batteries request authority to finish it." "No. The vessel may recover partial maneuvering power." Malok looked toward the projection. "Damage it again if recovery begins. Do not destroy it." Another rune entered the system at long range, then another. Lamenters. Malok watched their signatures resolve through auger distortion. The first was a strike cruiser burning hard toward the bark. 2 escorts followed. Their arrival vector placed them inside the engagement too quickly for caution, precisely as anticipated. "Reinforcements," the captain said. Malok did not answer. He had already seen the next lines. On the strategium of the Mater Lacrimarum, Malakim Foros watched those same reinforcement sigils and understood that they were approaching a trap. The knowledge did nothing to make the choice easier. Damage runes crawled across the bark's stern. Boarding reports arrived faster than the servitors could classify them. The apothecarian had lost access to 3 lift shafts. 2 gene seed vault approaches were under threat. Hundreds of wounded brothers remained aboard. Much of the chapter's accumulated progenoid stock rested within the protected reliquaries beneath them. If he ordered the wider fleet to withdraw, the Minotaurs might take everything. A captain beside him spoke first. "Lord, we can still preserve the vessels outside their immediate reach." Foros stared at the hololith. The captain continued more quietly. "If this is what it appears to be, they want us to converge." "I know. Then we should deny them. And abandon the wounded?" Silence. "The gene seed?" Foros asked. No answer. "The chapter's relics? The armories? The bark itself?" The captain's jaw tightened. "We may preserve the living. And become what afterward?" That silenced them. Foros turned toward the Vox shrine. "Transmit to every Lamenter's vessel within reach. Converge on Optera. Immediate combat translation where possible. All companies are to treat the Mater Lacrimarum as priority objective. No one objected. They all knew it might kill them. They also knew they could not do otherwise. The first Lamenters strike cruiser arrived firing. Its prow batteries opened before its translation wake had fully dispersed, macro shells slamming into a Minotaur escort and driving the smaller vessel out of formation. Thunderhawks launched while the cruiser was still maneuvering, their engines burning bright against the void. Escorts surged ahead, point defense guns tearing into Minotaur attack. Craft approaching the bark's damaged flank. Vox channels flooded with company identifiers, vessel codes, and overlapping tactical reports. Third Company elements inbound. Fifth Company acknowledges. Gunship wing entering attack vector. Brother Captain, we have your beacon. Boarding deck 6 reports relief force approaching. The sudden arrival of friendly fire transformed several engagements at once. Minotaur boarding boats vanished beneath concentrated defensive batteries. A bronze assault craft rolled away, trailing atmosphere and burning fuel, before a Lamenter's Thunderhawk raked its belly with Lascanon fire. Inside the Mater Lacrimarum, Imano heard a new report enter his helm. 7th Company, friendly counterboarders approaching your sector. For the first time since the alarms began, hope entered his thoughts. It disgusted him how quickly it came. "Hold the junction," he ordered. "They reach us. We take back the shrine gallery." The Lamenters struck with the violence of men defending their own heart. A boarding team forced its way through a secondary breach and hit the Minotaurs from behind. Brother Chalice laughed once over the Vox as bronze tactical icons disappeared from the Auspex. Imano did not rebuke him. Together they pushed forward. Grenades detonated in the corridor. A Minotaur died beneath concentrated bolter fire. Another was dragged down and killed with blades when ammunition failed. The Lamenters reclaimed the shrine gallery meter by bloody meter, passing the corpse of Brother Malak and the headless body left standing moments before. Reinforcement reports continued to arrive. More ships entered the system. More yellow icons appeared around the bark. On the Minotaur hololith, those same icons completed the shape Malok had been waiting to see. "Now," he said. Across the outer battle space, drives ignited. Vessels that had held beyond the main auger focus altered course together. Others emerged from masking positions behind system debris and dead orbital structures. Minotaur strike cruisers, escorts, heavy transports and support ships ceased presenting themselves as scattered elements and resolved into a concentrated chapter battle group. Their courses converged with brutal precision. On the Mater Lacrimarum, the Augur Master stared at his display. Additional contacts. Thoros turned. "Strength." The man looked up, face gone pale. "Chapter scale." The hololith bloomed bronze. Every escape vector the Lamenters had hoped to preserve now intersected another Minotaur firing solution. The first coordinated salvo struck the newly arrived strike cruiser across its engines. Its void shields collapsed beneath lance fire. Macro shells followed, smashing open launch decks and weapons housings, while boarding torpedoes accelerated behind the bombardment. A Lamenter's escort tried to turn away and found a second Minotaur formation already crossing its withdrawal line. Torpedoes struck its stern. The vessel remained capable of fighting. It was no longer capable of leaving. The pattern repeated. Engine decks, weapons batteries, maneuvering thrusters, escape corridors. The Minotaurs were not merely killing ships, they were taking away choices. Imano heard 6 requests for assistance in less than a minute. One deck reported Terminators. Another had lost atmosphere. A third claimed Minotaur breaches were cutting through toward the Apothecarian. A fourth went silent, halfway through transmission. The shrine gallery shook as another boarding torpedo struck somewhere below. Brother Chalice looked toward him. "How many fronts?" Imano checked the tactical feed. The display could no longer render them cleanly. "All of them." On the bridge, a mortal chronologium surf began recording the formal battle state under Phoros' authority. His voice shook as he spoke the designation into the archive cogitator. The opening engagement had become a fleet action. The fleet action had become entrapment. Whatever happened now would be remembered, if anyone survived to remember it. Below them, Optera IV turned slowly beneath the battle, its dark surface illuminated by the reflected fire of dying ships. Aboard the Minotaur flagship, Moloch watched the last required formation enter position. The first hour of the Battle of Optera had begun. He lifted one gauntleted hand toward the hololith. Commit the chapter. By the end of the first hour, the Mater Lacrimarum had ceased to be a ship in any meaningful sense and had become a continent under siege. The battle bark was too vast for any one warrior to comprehend from within, its armored length divided into chapel decks, manufactoria, launch vaults, medici sanctums, armories, magazines, plasma conduits, command crypts, and forgotten sublevels, whose original purpose had vanished beneath centuries of modification. Whole bloodlines of chapter serfs had been born, served and died without ever seeing more than a fraction of its interior. Some families tended a single gun battery for generations. Others maintained devotional halls or ammunition elevators older than the planets upon which their ancestors had first sworn themselves to the chapter. Now those same arteries were filling with smoke and corpses. Mortal crew fled through passageways where bronze and yellow giants killed one another with weapons capable of reducing ordinary men to wet fragments. A stray bolt round intended for a Minotaur struck a chapter serf in the spine and detonated in his abdomen, spraying the walls with his intestines before his body was torn in two. A second crewman disappeared beneath the heel of a Lamenter, forced backward by enemy fire. Neither Space Marine noticed. Above them, kilometers of hull plating endured the impact of macro shells, while void shields pulsed beneath renewed lance fire. Below, Manufactoria continued stamping ammunition, even as their ceiling supports split. Incense burners swung from chains in empty chapels, while shock waves traveled through the vessel's bones. The Mater Lacrimarum had carried the Lamenters through centuries of disaster. Now every ancient stone, every welded plate, and every consecrated machine spirit seemed to groan beneath the weight of another. Veteran Sergeant Imano no longer attempted to hold territory. Territory aboard a ship of such scale had become an illusion. Junctions could be defended until an enemy cut through a service duct behind them. Corridors could be sealed until breaches burned through the deck below. Shrine galleries could become fortresses until the atmosphere was vented or the walls collapsed. His task was not to stop the Minotaurs. It was to make every meter expensive. "Seal transverse bulkhead 8, he ordered, his voice transmitted through the squad net beneath the constant thunder of weapons. "Leave the lumen grid alive. Brother Chalice, place 2 crack charges beneath the western plinth. Detonate only when they cross the second icon." His surviving warriors obeyed, while withdrawing through a gallery lined with statues of Sanguinius and the long-dead heroes of the chapter. One statue had already lost its head to bolter fire. Another had been split from shoulder to hip by a power weapon, the stone surface glowing red along the wound. Imano halted at the gallery mouth long enough to fire 3 measured shots. The first struck a Minotaur at the knee joint and burst inside the articulation, dropping him. The second glanced from a pauldron. The third entered the exposed armpit of the warrior behind him and detonated beneath the plate. The Minotaur staggered, one arm hanging uselessly, but continued forward. Imano stepped back behind the closing blast door and thumbed the rune. The crack charges detonated beneath the plinth. Stone, bronze ornamentation, and fragments of deck plating filled the gallery. The lead Minotaur vanished beneath the collapsing statuary. The blast door sealed a heartbeat later. "Move!" The squad moved. Behind them came another noise, not gunfire, but a high metallic chirp repeated at measured intervals. Imano stopped. His auspex displayed a new signal. Locator beacon. "They are marking the junctions," Brother Chalice said. Imano stared at the rune. So the next wave does not need to learn the ship. The realization struck harder than the sound of the beacon. Every position they surrendered became more useful to the enemy than it had been before. Minotaur advance elements were not merely taking corridors, they were mapping them, feeding routes into fleet cogitators and helmet displays, transforming the Mater Lacrimarum from a labyrinth into a chart. Later assault waves would bypass wreckage, dead ends and sealed sections, because the first warriors had already bled to identify them. The Minotaurs were turning the Lamenters' own fortress monastery against them. The next contact came in a medical transept, where the walls were still painted white beneath soot and blood. 2 Lamenters had barricaded the far junction with medici carts and torn doors, while mortal orderlies tried to move wounded brothers toward the deeper sanctums. The Minotaurs came through the ceiling. A cutting charge blew the plating downward in a burst of molten metal, and the first bronze warrior dropped through the hole with a chainsword already screaming. Brother Tamaron fired upward. His bolter struck the Minotaur in the abdomen and burst beneath the cuirass. The bronze warrior landed anyway, guts hanging from the rupture in his plate in steaming ropes. His enhanced clotting organs were already thickening the blood pouring from him, and his armor had tightened around the wound to preserve pressure. He drove his chainsword through an orderly before Tamaron could fire again. The mortal vanished beneath the teeth from shoulder to pelvis, organs and shredded cloth spraying across the medical wall. Tamaron shot the Minotaur through the face at point-blank range. The helm burst. The corpse remained upright long enough for a second warrior to use it as partial cover. The fighting collapsed into hand-to-hand violence. A Minotaur power sword removed Brother Lathus's left arm at the shoulder. The cut was so clean that the severed limb remained clamped around its bolter when it struck the deck. Lathus did not scream. His armor flooded the wound with pressure and coagulants, while his remaining hand drew a bolt pistol from his thigh. He pressed the bleeding stump against his breastplate and fired until the pistol locked empty, putting one shell through his attacker's gorget and another through an eye lens. The Minotaur fell across him. Lathus kicked the corpse aside and reached for ammunition with fingers slick in his own blood. Across the transept, Chalice met a bronze warrior chainsword to chainsword. Teeth struck teeth and filled the air with sparks and fragments of shattered adamantium. Neither warrior tried to overpower the other through strength alone. Both knew Astartes' anatomy. Both aimed for the gaps in plate. The Minotaur shifted his weapon toward Chalice's elbow joint. Chalice stepped inward, allowing the enemy blade to score his pauldron, then rammed his own chainsword beneath the bronze cuirass, where the abdominal plates overlapped. The weapon tore through armor, muscle, and intestines. The Minotaur head-butted him hard enough to crack Chalice's faceplate, then plunged a combat knife into the damaged seam beneath his arm. Chalice released the chainsword, caught the enemy's wrist, and twisted until the bones broke. Imano ended it with a bolt through the Minotaur's temple. "Withdraw." Tamaron stared at Lathus. "He cannot keep pace." Lathus looked at them through a cracked helm lens. "Then I remain." Imano held his gaze for a heartbeat. No argument was necessary. "Hold until empty." Lathus nodded. They left him sitting against the barricade with his bolt pistol reloaded in his remaining hand and the severed arm of his power armor lying beside him. The first Minotaur through the smoke died to his fire. The second did not. Far deeper inside the bark, the gene seed vaults had become the center of a war that most of the chapter did not yet understand. Apothecaries and calyx priests moved through armored reliquary chambers under red emergency illumination, carrying sealed progenoid caskets in reinforced cradles. The priests wore ritual white and gold beneath protective aprons darkened by blood. Their voices murmured old invocations to Sanguinius, while servo skulls hovered beside them, recording every transfer. Gene seed was not ammunition. It was ancestry-made flesh. Each preserved progenoid represented the continuation of a lineage already thinned by centuries of catastrophe. The Lamenters could lose ships and replace them eventually, They could lose armor and forge more. They could even lose hundreds of brothers and rebuild across generations if their genetic inheritance remained intact. If the vaults burned, the chapter's future would burn with them. Wounded Astartes, who could still hold weapons, had been stationed before the inner doors. One warrior had no functioning legs. His lower body was locked into a medici brace while he rested a bolter across his lap. Another wore only half his warplate, the right side of his torso covered by surgical dressings beneath a borrowed pauldron. A third had lost an eye and part of his jaw. None requested removal. An apothecary entered carrying another casket. The half-armored warrior watched him pass. How many remain outside? Too many. How many Minotaurs? The apothecary did not answer. The warrior laughed once, softly. Then enough. On the strategium, Phoros watched casualty sigils multiply across the internal schematic and came to the conclusion Moloch had anticipated. We counterattack. A captain turned sharply. Within the ship? Outside it. The hololith shifted to the launch decks. Several Thunderhawks and Storm Ravens remained serviceable, despite damage to the stern. Phoros highlighted enemy boarding craft, clustering along the bark's flank, and one Minotaur vessel, whose shields had weakened beneath sustained fire. Launch everything that can clear the bays. Strike their assault craft first, then weapon housings. We need minutes, not kills. Launch corridor is under fire. Then fly through it. The captain inclined his head. As you command. The order propagated through the ship. On launch deck Secundus, blast shutters opened onto a void filled with tracer fire and burning wreckage. Thunderhawk engines rose to a shriek. The first gunship launched with fragments of another vessel still striking its fuselage. A Storm Raven followed so close behind that its pilot used the Thunderhawk's wake to clear the debris field. Defensive turrets fired around them. Minotaur attack craft converged. Lamenters pilots flew between macro shell trajectories and clouds of chaff at distances that left mortal crew vomiting blood from acceleration stress. One Thunderhawk rolled beneath an incoming boarding vessel and fired its lascannons upward. Both beams struck the assault craft through its belly armor. The Minotaur vessel burned from within. Its engines failed. For several seconds it continued forward with its cargo of Astartes trapped inside, while fire consumed the troop compartment. Then, ammunition cooked off. The craft split open and hurled bronze-armored bodies into the void, some still moving as they spun away into darkness. A second assault boat attempted to evade incoming fire and struck the Mater Lacrimarum at the wrong angle. Its prow clipped the outer armor at immense speed. The craft disintegrated. One half skated across the hull in a trail of sparks and molten metal, while the other exploded into debris. The Lamenters paid for every kill. A Storm Raven returned with one wing almost entirely gone. It entered the launch bay sideways, struck the deck, tore through a line of maintenance servitors, and plowed into stacked munitions crates before coming to rest against a support pillar. Burning fuel spread beneath it. One servitor was cut in half by the wreckage. Another remained fused beneath the gunship's landing assembly, organic components pulping around augmetic limbs. The side hatch opened anyway. 3 Lamenters climbed from the burning compartment. One carried a wounded brother over his shoulder. The other 2 drew bolters. "Where?" one demanded. A deck serf pointed toward an internal access gate, where alarms announced another boarding breach. The surviving Marines went there without removing scorched armor. Aboard a Minotaur strike cruiser, Reclusiarch Ivanus Encomi stood within a preparation chamber, crowded with warriors awaiting deployment. His armor was darker than that of many of his brothers, marked with the symbols of office and the scars of old campaigns. Acrosius rested in one gauntlet. Around him, bronze helms turned toward his voice. "The Lamenters are not misled brothers," Encomi said. "They are not children who wandered from the Emperor's road. They chose defiance. They chose the tyrant. Their grief does not absolve them. Their bloodline does not sanctify treachery. They have been judged." No warrior answered. They call themselves sons of Sanguinius. Let them remember that Sanguinius died for the Imperium they now resist. His gaze moved across them. We are not here to debate their sorrow. The boarding alarm sounded. We are here to conclude it. Where Moloch spoke as if every word were a tactical coordinate, Enkomi gave the Minotaurs something colder than rage: justification. He did not need them to hate the Lamenters as individuals. He needed them to regard destruction as sentence. The first sign that the Lamenters' counterattack was working came aboard the Mater Lacrimarum, when pressure eased across 3 sectors almost simultaneously. Imano received reports that Minotaur contact had diminished near the Apothecarian access routes and 2 shrine decks. Friendly squads began reclaiming junctions. Foros committed reserve elements to strengthen the recovered ground. Moloch watched them move. Transfer confirmed, a Minotaur officer reported. Lamenter reserves shifting toward the central medical sectors. Armory approaches? Reduced. Drive control? Reduced. Moloch placed 2 gauntleted fingers against the hololithic display. Strike both. Minotaur assault indicators bloomed elsewhere. The apparent withdrawal had never been a withdrawal. Within moments, new boarding torpedoes struck near the armory decks. Breacher teams emerged from pre-selected hull points, while another force assaulted routes leading toward drive control. The Lamenters had reinforced the places Moloch wanted them to reinforce, and weakened the places he actually intended to take. Foros understood as soon as the reports arrived. "He gave us ground," one captain said. Foros stared at the changing tactical picture. "No, he sold it." The captain beside him looked toward the fleet display, where 2 Lamenters' vessels still retained partial maneuvering capability. "Lord, there is still a corridor toward the outer system. Narrow, but possible. We can order the mobile ships to break formation before the Minotaurs close it." "And leave the bark?" "Yes." "The wounded?" The captain's jaw tightened. "Yes." "The vaults?" Silence. Foros looked toward him. "Say the rest." "If we remain, we may lose all of them anyway." Foros turned back to the hololith. He knew it was true. He knew Moloch had created the entire battle around that truth. The Minotaurs had not trapped the Lamenters with superior engines or greater cunning alone. They had trapped them with loyalty. Every wounded brother aboard the Mater Lacrimarum was another chain. Every progenoid casket was another. Every relic and armor suit and memory embedded in the fortress monastery made withdrawal harder. The captain waited. Foros finally spoke. "Maintain formation." No one argued. The second hour bled toward the third. Imano was crossing an armored transept beneath the gene seed approaches when the deck beneath him erupted. The Minotaurs had placed breaching charges below. The first detonation lifted the entire transept. Adamantium ribs bent upward. The second tore them apart. The floor folded like parchment beneath forces never meant to exist inside a ship. Lamenters and Minotaurs vanished together into fire. One bronze warrior was cut in half by a descending support beam. Another disappeared beneath falling deck plate. Imano felt himself leave the ground before something struck his helm. Darkness. He returned to consciousness beneath bodies. For several seconds, he heard nothing except the ringing inside his skull and the rasp of his own breathing. Blood covered the left side of his vision. His helm lens there had shattered and filled with red. A dead Minotaur lay across his legs. Brother Chalice was somewhere nearby, either moving or convulsing. Imano could not tell which. Fire burned through the torn transept. Pieces of adamantium continued falling into the lower deck with thunderous impacts. His tactical display flickered. One rune returned, then another, then dozens. Bronze locator icons were advancing through the ship. Imano cleared blood from his remaining lens and forced the dead Minotaur off his legs. The icons were moving toward the gene seed vault. The third hour had begun. The third hour of the Battle of Optera began with the death of cities that had never touched a world. Warships measured in kilometers burned above Optra IV, each vessel carrying populations large enough to fill mortal settlements, and every exchange of fire killed men by the hundred without a single Adeptus Astartes seeing their faces. Gun crews sweated in macro battery chambers where loading assemblies the size of cathedral naves dragged shells into breaches beneath the shouted binharik of engine seers and the droning prayers of ammunition serfs. Plasma technicians worked in reactor vaults that trembled beneath energies capable of turning entire decks into expanding suns. Damage control parties climbed through smoke-filled passages with sealing foam, cutting torches and emergency respirators, while decks above them ceased to exist. The void itself had become crowded with the evidence of ruin. Broken escorts drifted through expanding clouds of frozen atmosphere. Severed armor plates rotated lazily between ships still fighting. Bodies turned in darkness alongside ruptured escape craft, most of the dead too small to be noticed against the incandescent violence surrounding them. Lance beams flashed across distances that would have swallowed continents. Macro shells crossed the black in disciplined salvos. Torpedoes burned behind them in swarms, their machine spirits steering toward heat signatures and auger returns, while point defense batteries vomited streams of tracer fire into their paths. The battle was being decided by a few hundred transhuman warriors, yet tens of thousands of mortal souls labored, bled, and died inside the weapons those warriors commanded. The Lamenters fought as if audacity could compensate for arithmetic. Their ships did not remain obediently inside the shrinking pocket Moloch had built around them. Strike cruisers surged through firing lanes that cautious commanders would have abandoned, using sudden acceleration burns and brutally close maneuvers to isolate individual Minotaur vessels before the larger bronze formation could respond. Boarding craft launched into weapon fire because delay was more dangerous than interception. One Lamenters cruiser, its port batteries already burning and its void shields flickering beneath repeated punishment, detected a Minotaur lance formation aligning upon a smaller vessel whose holds carried wounded battle brothers from an earlier campaign. The crippled cruiser altered course without waiting for permission. Its captain threw thousands of lives across the firing solution. Lances struck its flank. Armor vaporized. Entire gun decks became incandescent cavities. The vessel rolled beneath the impacts, but remained between the Minotaurs and the wounded transport, long enough for the latter to escape the first killing salvo. The cruiser answered as it died, macro batteries firing at such close range that the recoil cracked already damaged internal supports. 2 salvos struck a Minotaur escort. The first stripped its shields. The second broke the ship's spine. Fire blossomed through the bronze vessel from within, and for a moment the Lamenters had exchanged one dying city for another. It was magnificent. It was suicidal. It was exactly the kind of exchange Moloch wanted them to make. Reclusiarch Ivanus Encomi watched the Lamenters bleed themselves across the void from within the assault cathedral of a Minotaur strike cruiser. Tactical runes glowed over the faceplate of his helm, each representing a boarding vector, a weapon emplacement, or a known defensive concentration aboard the strike cruiser Dawn Reaper. The vessel had become his assigned objective because taking it would fracture the Lamenter's ability to coordinate the surrounding ships. He did not intend to duel its captain. He did not intend to seize its chapel or break its banners for the satisfaction of doing so. He intended to blind it, cripple its propulsion, and cut the command hierarchy from the engines that obeyed it. Around him, Minotaur veterans stood locked into assault cradles, while boarding craft engines rose through the deck in a vibration that could be felt through ceramite. The first impact waves will die, Encomi told them. No warrior moved. Their purpose is to identify the guns that kill them. The second will destroy those guns. The third will take the ship. One veteran turned his helm slightly toward the Reclusiarch. And if the second dies with the first, Encomi's voice carried no anger, then the fourth becomes the third. The condemned do not become innocent because the executioner must swing twice.
The assault launch rune changed from amber to blood red. Encomi raised his Crozius. By the throne, by the judgment given us, break them. The first Minotaur craft reached the Dawn Reaper beneath a storm of defensive fire. The Lamenters had understood what was coming and prepared the ship accordingly. Auspec's nodes were isolated so that jamming could not blind every sector simultaneously. Bolter teams occupied junctions with overlapping fields of fire. Melter charges had been fixed behind sacrificial pressure doors. When the first breaching torpedo punched through the outer hull, it entered a compartment deliberately left empty. Bronze-armored warriors emerged into darkness, scanned the passage, and advanced. The pressure doors slammed shut, before and behind them. A Lamenter detonated the melter charges from 2 compartments away.
Explosion did not simply kill the trapped Minotaurs, it erased the wall separating them from the void. Atmosphere vanished with a shriek. Bronze bodies were dragged outward amid shards of molten metal, one warrior striking the breach hard enough to tear an arm from its socket before the vacuum took him. The Lamenters guarding the adjoining corridor had barely reset their weapons when another boarding craft struck within the same ruined zone. The outer section was still decompressing. The first bronze figures through the breach found the frozen bodies of their brothers lodged against twisted plating. They did not stop to recover them. 2 Minotaurs seized the corpses by armor handles and pushed them ahead as crude shields while storm bolters fired between their shoulders. Bolt rounds struck the dead, tore through ruined ceramite, and detonated inside flesh already freezing solid. The corpse shields came apart under the barrage, arms and fragments spinning away into the decompressed compartment. But by then, the living warriors behind them had crossed the open ground. The fighting aboard the Dawn Reaper became a succession of murder chambers. Lamenters killed the first Minotaur through one chapel door with concentrated bolter fire, then lost 3 brothers when a breacher charge opened the wall beside them. A bronze veteran entered through the smoke and drove a power fist into a Lamenter's breastplate. The blow crushed ceramite, fused ribs, both hearts and lungs into a pulped cavity before throwing the corpse backward. The dead Marine's armor struck a shrine pillar and broke it in half. Another Lamenter fired a melter weapon from less than 2 meters away. The veteran's torso glowed white and collapsed inward as armor and flesh became a single incandescent ruin. He was dead before he hit the floor, but the warriors behind him were already stepping through the vapor. In another compartment, Lamenters deliberately vented atmosphere and fought with mag boots locked to the decking while ammunition casings and blood floated around them. A Minotaur lost his left hand to a chainsword and caught the severed wrist with his remaining gauntlet before it drifted away, ripping the ammunition pouch from his own dead limb and continuing the advance. Nothing about the battle resembled mortal infantry combat. Wounds that should have ended lives became inconveniences until enough organs failed at once. Warriors with cracked skulls continued firing. Men with punctured lungs fought on because their secondary physiology preserved them. Broken armor locked around ruined limbs and turned damaged bodies into walking gun platforms. Asterion Moloch watched the casualty projections rise and said nothing. The hololithic display presented the battle without screams, blood, or burning flesh. It reduced everything to colors and expenditure. Minotaur boarding losses exceeded the first estimate. Assault craft strength had fallen. 2 strike cruisers had taken major damage. Terminator casualties were increasing. None of it altered the shape Moloch cared about. The Lamenters' losses remained worse. They had entered Optera already diminished, and every dead yellow armored warrior represented gene seed, experience and combat strength that could not be replaced within the span of the war. A Minotaur captain approached the strategium table. "Lord, the assault on the Dawn Reaper is consuming reserves faster than projected." Moloch's eyes never left the tactical display. "Is Encomi advancing?" "Yes." "Then the projection is irrelevant." The captain considered the Lamenter's casualty runes. "We can preserve strength by reducing pressure upon their outer vessels." Moloch finally looked at him. And allow them time to disengage? No, Lord. Then preserve nothing. He returned his gaze to the hololith. Every brother they lose is a wound they cannot close. Every brother we lose is a cost already accounted for. Malachim Foros refused to give Moloch the clean conclusion he desired. The chapter master stood over the Mater Lacrimarum's damaged strategium display, while fragments of information arrived from ships fighting half-blind under Minotaur interference. The Bronze Fleet had concentrated too much strength along the bark's stern and starboard approach. That concentration had created a narrow weakness beyond the portward debris field, a region complicated by the drifting wreck of a destroyed escort and the plasma wake of a crippled cruiser. Foros stared at the geometry until the opportunity became visible. "Transmit to 4th Company elements and every gunship that can launch," he ordered. "Strike their nearest escort group. Do not attempt destruction. Force them to turn their prow batteries." A captain understood before the order was complete. "You mean to open the debris corridor? For as long as they allow it." Foros marked a second group of ships. "These vessels will feint directly toward the northern Minotaur line. Burn hard enough to convince them we intend a breakthrough there. They will take punishing fire. They need only survive long enough to be believed." The orders went out. Lamenters' ships accelerated in opposite directions. Thunderhawks swept around the wreck field and attacked an exposed Minotaur escort from behind, Lascannons carving into engines, while the vessel rotated to bring weapons to bear. The movement created a seam. One Lamenters frigate drove into it, then another. For the first time since Moloch had closed the trap, an escape corridor appeared. "Take it," one captain urged Foros. "Lord, order the bark through while the line is open." Foros looked toward the helm officers. "Drive status." A mortal serf answered through blood running from one ear. "Port translation vanes remain responsive. Primary plasma thrust is at less than half. Maneuvering clusters 3 through 7 are intermittent." "Enough?" The serf swallowed. "Perhaps." The Mater Lacrimarum tried. Deep within her stern, damaged plasma conduits screamed under renewed demand. Reactor output climbed. Machine spirits already tortured by the battle responded with flickering obedience. For several seconds, the immense vessel began to turn toward the opening Foros had created. Then, a weakened drive manifold ruptured. Plasma flooded a maintenance cathedral and vaporized every mortal inside before the blast shutters could descend. The shock propagated through adjacent engine compartments. Warning icons turned from amber to red. The bark lost thrust. Foros watched the escape corridor begin to close. No one needed to tell him what had happened. On an outer sanctum deck, Imano received the order to withdraw while standing ankle-deep in blood. The sanctuary had once housed relics of campaigns fought centuries before. Now, broken reliquaries and shattered statues had become barricades. Dead from both chapters lay in layers across the approaches. Gravity had failed intermittently, and spheres of blood drifted above the floor before splashing against armor whenever the ship shuddered. Imano's damaged auto-senses painted false threat markers over corpses that remained warm enough to confuse thermal recognition. Coolant leaked from a ruptured conduit and filled the hall with white vapor. Through it, power swords and chainswords appeared as brief flashes before warriors emerged behind them. "Sergeant," the Vox officer said, "command orders abandonment of the outer sanctum. Fall toward the gene vault approaches." Imano looked around him. 6 wounded Lamenters remained incapable of withdrawal. 2 could not stand. One had been opened from hip to sternum and held his own organs in place beneath a shattered abdominal plate. Another had lost both feet when a power weapon cut through the deck at ankle height. "We cannot move all of them," Brother Chalice said. One of the wounded warriors heard him. "Then stop trying." Imano looked down at the speaker. The warrior was propped against the base of a broken statue, his legs useless beneath him. "Brother, give me ammunition. You will die here." The wounded Marine coughed blood into his helm grill. That was not a refusal. No one spoke after that. Bolters were placed across knees. Magazines were stacked within reach. One wounded brother accepted a chainsword, despite lacking the strength to lift it higher than his lap. Another asked for grenades and placed them beneath the folds of his ruined armor. Imano crouched before them. The vault approaches lie behind us. The warrior against the statue nodded. Then our bodies are another door. Imano rose. Make it a heavy one. The surviving mobile Lamenters withdrew. The Minotaurs arrived less than a minute later. Imano heard the fighting through the vox. There were no pleas. The wounded opened fire together, bolters hammering until the sanctuary became an echoing gun chamber. Minotaur return fire answered. One Lamenter laughed over the channel after killing. Something. Another shouted the name of Sanguinius. Then came the grinding scream of a chainsword and the heavy impact of a thunderhammer. The vox dissolved into static, gunfire and breathing. A final voice said, "Still here." A bolt detonated. Silence followed. Imano kept walking. By then, every deck smelled of the same things. Blood, propellant, burned insulation, hot ceramite, human waste released from ruptured bodies, spent casings crushed under Astartes' boots into carpets of flesh and brass. The Mater Lacrimarum seemed tired. Bulkheads remained half-closed because hydraulic systems had failed. Lumen strips flickered even in undamaged corridors. The ship's ancient machine spirit answered commands a fraction slower than before. Steam hissed around broken shrines. Fires consumed oxygen in sections where ventilation no longer functioned. The Fortress of Tears was becoming exactly that, a wounded thing filled with the dead of both bloodlines. Aboard the Dawn Reaper, Enkomi reached the command approach through a corridor containing more Minotaur corpses than living warriors. His assault force had been reduced, reinforced, and reduced again. The Reclusiarch's armor bore a deep gouge across the breastplate, and blood belonging to at least 3 warriors had dried upon his Crozius. The Lamenters still holding the command junction fought until ammunition failed. One attacked with a power sword after losing half his face. Enkomi broke his guard with the Crozius and crushed the weapon's head into the warrior's chest. Ribs collapsed beneath the power field. The Lamenter's back struck the deck hard enough to crack plating. When the final defenders died, Enkomi did not look at them again. "Command node secured," a veteran reported. "Propulsion access is contested." Enkomi checked the tactical feed. Other Minotaur formations still fought across the ship. "Transfer second cohort to propulsion. Third cohort redeploy to launch control." The veteran glanced toward the dead. "Recovery teams? Later. Our brother's gene seed? Later." Enkomi turned toward the next sealed door. "The battle is not finished, simply because this compartment belongs to us." The 5th hour approached. Moloch received the reports in sequence. Multiple Lamenters vessels immobilized. The Dawn Reaper functionally captured, though resistance remained aboard. The Mater Lacrimarum unable to exploit the withdrawal corridor. Surface landings detected on Optera IV as damaged craft, and isolated Lamenters formations sought defensible ground below. The battle was spreading beyond the void. A Minotaur officer highlighted the planetary returns. Enemy forces are establishing positions near the southern supply sites and broken landing zones. Moloch studied the planet beneath the battle fleet. "Armor reserves?" he asked. "Ready." "Fresh assault companies?" "Ready." The chapter master looked once toward the burning icons surrounding the Mater Lacrimarum, then toward the cold globe of Optera IV. "Commit them." Across Minotaur vessels, armored engines rolled toward embarkation decks. Thunderhawks loaded fresh ammunition. Assault craft cycled airlocks, while bronze warriors entered their restraint harnesses. Below them, the feral world turned beneath the fire of dying ships. The 5th hour began with the Minotaurs descending toward it. By the 5th hour of the Battle of Optera, The void between the warships had become as lethal as the decks within them. Wreckage drifted in slow processions between crippled vessels, armor slabs rotating end over end beside torn gun housings, severed launch gantries, and the frozen bodies of men who had been vented from ruptured compartments before they could even seal their mouths. Some still wore emergency masks. Others had died barefaced, eyes crystallized, blood frozen into dark fans around wounds that would never clot. Transfer tunnels stretched between ships and docking structures like broken arteries, many of them half-pressurized and lit only by failing lumen strips. Gravity fluctuated without warning. In one compartment, a warrior could weigh the full mass of his armor and weapons. In the next, he might drift above the deck with blood droplets, spent casings and fragments of bone orbiting him in sluggish silence. Then, a damaged gravitic generator would re-engage, and everything would fall at once. Bodies struck plating hard enough to break necks already stiff with death. Ammunition boxes crashed through railings. Severed limbs bounced across decks. Astartes locked their boots to the metal whenever warning runes flickered, fighting with mag clamps biting through the pull and release of broken systems while the battle continued around them. Across wrecked escorts, broken docking arms and boarding spines welded hastily between hulls. Yellow and bronze warriors murdered one another in spaces built for machinery rather than war. Terminator assault squad Zalaos entered one such transfer spine beneath a ceiling leaking coolant and blood. Their artificer-modified Terminator armor filled the corridor almost wall to wall, each warrior encased in layered plate, scarred by the previous hours of fighting. Vedic pattern storm shields locked together before them, their surfaces blackened by bolt impacts and edged with flickering power field discharge. Stormlord pattern thunderhammers rested in their free hands, weapons with heads broad enough to pulp a mortal man from chest to pelvis without slowing. Zalaos advanced at the center of the formation with the deliberate pace of something that expected the enemy to exhaust itself first. His squad did not hurry. It had no need. Tactical Marines followed behind in the spaces the Terminators cleared, using the shield wall as moving cover, while Auspex specialists mapped branching maintenance ducts and secondary access shafts. To the Minotaurs, progress did not require elegance. It required certainty. A corridor taken at the cost of one brother was still taken. A corridor taken at the cost of three remained taken if the enemy had lost something harder to replace. The Lamenters waiting ahead understood that truth well enough to fear it. They had prepared 3 defensive lines inside the transfer spine, each positioned to force the Minotaurs into a narrower field of fire than the last. The first position opened with crack grenades. Magnetic charges struck bronze shields, walls and deck plating before detonating almost together. The pressure wave filled the passage with sparks and fragments. Zalaos's forward shields dipped beneath the force. Bolter fire followed instantly, concentrated not against the center mass of the Terminators, but against knees, elbows, and the gaps between shields. One Minotaur staggered as a shell entered beneath his arm and burst within the joint housing. Another took a bolt through a damaged knee seal and went down onto one leg. Then, the melter weapon fired. White heat filled the corridor. A shield vanished inside the glare, its field generator screaming as the metal surface turned incandescent. The Terminator behind it reeled backward, chest armor liquefying along one side, but remained upright long enough for his brothers to drag him behind the line. "Advance!" Zalaos ordered. The word was almost lost beneath the storm. They moved 3 meters. Then the Lamenters withdrew. The second defensive line waited beyond a pressure arch. The Minotaurs crossed the threshold, and the deck beneath them ruptured. The Lamenters had weakened the hull structure and prepared the chamber for decompression. A blast charge tore open the outer wall. Atmosphere vanished in an instant. Everything unsecured became a projectile. Bolter casings, broken devotional plaques, scraps of cloth and dead bodies ripped toward the breach. The Minotaurs locked their boots, but the floor beneath Brother Porphyro failed with the wall. For a heartbeat, he remained suspended at the edge, one gauntlet striking the torn deck hard enough to dent it. Then the remaining metal peeled away beneath his mass. Porphyro disappeared into the void. No cry followed him. His tactical icon moved rapidly away from the hull and then vanished into static. Zalaos did not turn. Hold. The squad stopped where the Lamenters expected them to pursue. That hesitation saved them from the next trap and condemned the defenders. The yellow-armored warriors beyond the second line withdrew farther, believing they had stalled the Terminators and killed at least one. They did not see the Minotaur tactical elements moving through the maintenance ducts marked by earlier boarding teams. Zalaos kept his remaining Terminators in place, shields locked across the damaged junction, while Minotaur bolters fired measured shots to convince the Lamenters that the frontal attack would resume. 5 minutes later, the Lamenters counterattacked. They had been ordered to retake the junction before further Minotaur waves could exploit it. They charged from the far side under covering fire, chains wards active, a sergeant carrying a power axe at their center. The Minotaur flanking force struck from behind. The Lamenters turned too late. Bolter fire hammered their rear line at point-blank range, while Zalaos' shield wall opened. The Terminators advanced into them. A Lamenter raised his chains ward against a thunderhammer and ceased to be recognizable as a warrior. The Stormlord head struck his upper torso and collapsed the breastplate inward. Ceramite shattered into the body beneath. Ribs exploded. Both primary and secondary hearts ruptured under the impact, and fragments of yellow armor burst from the warrior's back as he was thrown across the compartment. He struck the wall hard enough to leave blood and pieces of fused bone embedded in the metal. Another Lamenter drove a power blade into the side of a Minotaur Terminator, forcing it through a vulnerable seal beneath the arm. The wounded Minotaur answered with his shield, slamming the yellow-armored warrior against the bulkhead until his helm split. The second blow crushed the skull completely. The third was unnecessary. He struck anyway, because the enemy had not yet fallen. The junction changed hands. Again. By the time Veteran Sergeant Imano reached it, the Minotaurs had already moved deeper. He recognized the dead before he recognized the place. Brother Marcion from the 5th Company lay face down with his spine broken beneath a thunderhammer wound. Brother Helias, who had fought beside Imano decades before during a boarding action against pirates in the Maelstrom approaches, was still sitting against the wall where death had left him, one hand fused around the grip of an empty bolt pistol. 3 others wore heraldic markings Imano knew, but could not immediately name because fatigue had begun turning memory sluggish. Their bodies lay among Minotaurs, blackened deck plating and fragments of the pressure arch. Chalice moved beside him, stepping around a severed bronze gauntlet that still twitched from damaged armor servos. 5th Company? He asked. Some. How many fought here? Imano looked at the corridor. I do not know. That answer disturbed him more than any casualty count. The battle had grown too large to be understood by men inside it. Somewhere above them, ships were dying. Somewhere below them, wounded brothers guarded the gene seed vaults. Minotaurs were fighting in launch bays, sanctums, armories, reactor access ways, and half-vented corridors whose names Imano had never learned. Other Lamenters were boarding enemy vessels or descending toward Optera IV. Chapter Master Phoros received more data than any warrior alive and still could not see everything. Moloch himself commanded a battle whose true scale existed only as probabilities and icons. Every Astartes experienced the Battle of Optera as a few meters of metal, a handful of brothers, and whatever enemy happened to be trying to kill him. A roar came through the Vox. Not tactical speech, not a command, a name. Horus. Imano stopped. The word echoed from a junction ahead, followed by bolter fire and something that sounded like a man screaming through broken teeth. Then the black-armored Lamenter came into view. He had been one of the wounded. Imano did not know his name, He knew only what he had become. The warrior's armor had been painted black in haste, the color uneven across damaged yellow plate, ritual markings half completed upon the shoulders. His helm was gone. Blood covered his face. One eye had swollen shut. The other stared at enemies who did not exist in the present. He moved with a violence beyond discipline, beyond tactical sense, beyond pain. A bolt round had entered beneath his ribs and detonated somewhere in his abdomen, leaving the side of his torso open. He did not appear to notice. Another wound had torn muscle from one thigh. He crossed the deck at a sprint anyway. The Minotaurs ahead fired. Rounds struck him in the chest and shoulder. He came on. One shell tore away part of his pauldron. Another burst against his flank and sent blood across the wall. The black-armored warrior crashed into the first Minotaur before the bronze Astartes could lower his bolter. He seized the Minotaur's helm with one gauntlet and drove a chainsword beneath the gorget with the other. Teeth shrieked through neck seals, flesh and vertebrae. The head came free in a spray of blood. The Death Company warrior hurled the body aside and struck another Minotaur hard enough to break the bronze warrior's arm at the elbow before sawing through his cuirass. "Traitor!" he snarled. "You slew him. I saw you. I saw the angel fall." The Minotaur drove a chainsword into his side. The weapon entered beneath the ribs and tore through organs. The black-armored Lamenter turned toward him. For the first time, the Minotaur hesitated. The Death Company warrior grasped the chainsword with his free hand, teeth ripping fingers from his gauntlet, and dragged himself farther onto the blade just to reach the warrior holding it. He head-butted the Minotaur once, twice. The bronze helm cracked. On the third impact, the faceplate collapsed inward. "Father," the Lamenter whispered. A thunder hammer struck him from the side. His left arm vanished at the shoulder. He spun, fell onto one knee and tried to rise. The hammer struck again. The second blow destroyed the remaining structure of his chest. Armor burst outward. Bones and organs became a single dark mass beneath crushed ceramite.
Remember, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support helps.
Even then, one hand moved weakly toward the Minotaur who had killed him. The third blow ended it. Silence settled for a fraction of a second. No Minotaur laughed. No one offered insult. The Terminator who had wielded the hammer looked down at the ruin, then toward the surviving warriors around him. "Black plate," he said over the tactical net. "Mark them." The report reached Asterion Moloch less than a minute later. "Death Company manifestation confirmed," an officer said. "At least one, possibly more. The warrior sustained repeated bolt impacts and catastrophic abdominal trauma before termination." Moloch regarded the internal tactical display of the Mater Lacrimarum. Designation: Unstable Blood Angel's lineage expression. Black Rage probable. Alter engagement doctrine. The officer waited. Black-armored Lamenters are priority threats. No single combat. No pursuit into confined ground. Shield formations forward. Concentrated fire before contact. Heavy weapons if available. Understood. Moloch looked toward another cluster of battle reports. Do not answer madness with pride. The order passed through the fleet. Inside the Mater Lacrimarum, pride had already become an unaffordable luxury. The reactor-adjacent compartment designated Sanctum Engine 9 had been compromised by a Minotaur boarding assault that severed plasma containment feeds running beside the deck. Warning runes spread across the strategium in blood red. The leak was still localized, but pressure within the conduit was climbing. If containment failed completely, plasma would flood adjoining sections and could trigger a chain reaction through the secondary drive network. Hundreds of mortal crew remained nearby. So did 3 Lamenters squads still fighting the Minotaurs inside the compartment. Foros received the report in silence. "Can they withdraw?" he asked. A serf at the engineering station shook his head. "Access route severed, Lord. The enemy controls the only intact junction." "Can the compartment be vented?" "Not fast enough." "Can containment be restored?" The serf looked down. "No, Lord." One of the captains beside Foros understood first. "We can seal the blast gates around the entire section." Foros looked at him. The captain continued. "If the compartment is isolated before rupture, the secondary conduits may survive." "How many brothers?" 11 confirmed. Foros's face did not change. For several seconds no one spoke. Then the vox crackled. A Lamenter voice came through, distorted by interference. "Command, this is Brother Sergeant Ardan. We have lost the eastern junction. Enemy terminators advancing. Plasma containment is failing. We require extraction vector." Foros closed his eyes for a fraction of a heartbeat. Moloch would not have needed that heartbeat. The knowledge made the choice worse. Foros opened them again. "There is no extraction vector." Silence answered him. Ardan understood. "Then give us the enemy." Foros looked toward the engineering station. "Seal the section." The serf hesitated. "Now." Massive blast gates began to descend around Sanctum Engine 9. Inside, warning klaxons howled. Ardan and the remaining Lamenters heard the doors moving and knew exactly what it meant. They did not request reconsideration. Their bolters opened fire instead. Minotaur weapons answered. The last thing Foros heard from the compartment was Ardan invoking the name of Sanguinius, while Chainsward screamed around him. The blast gates locked. Moments later, the plasma conduit ruptured. White fire filled the sealed section. Everyone inside ceased to exist. The pressure struck the gates hard enough to deform adamantium, but they held. The rest of the ship survived. Foros stared at the dead sector on the hololith. 11 brothers. He had killed them to preserve the greater whole. The logic was impeccable. That was what he hated most. The 6th hour became the 7th, beneath a sky filled with wreckage. From Optera the 4th, the battle above looked like the end of creation. Burning fragments entered the atmosphere in long, incandescent trails, pieces of escort vessels and attack craft turning into artificial meteors as they fell. Some disintegrated before reaching the ground. Others struck hard enough to throw towers of soil and stone into the air. One section of warship armor the size of a fortress screamed across the horizon, trailing fire before vanishing behind distant ridges. Moments later, the ground shook. Thunderhawks descended between the falling wreckage, bronze, yellow. Some came under control, others burned. Behind them followed heavier transports bearing armored vehicles, ammunition, breaching equipment, and the fresh warriors of the Minotaurs' reserve. Lamenters' gunships plunged toward defensive positions already being established around landing fields and supply zones. Above all of it, the crippled fleets continued killing one another beneath the cold stars. The void had become too small for the war, so the war descended to the world below. The 7th hour began over Optera the 4th. Optera the 4th received the war as fire falling from heaven. By the 7th hour of the battle, the atmosphere above the feral world had become a second battlefield through which broken gunships, burning armor plates, and whole sections of dead warships descended in incandescent ruin. Lamenters' Thunderhawks came down first where they could, dragging wounded engines through the smoke and dropping battle brothers into hastily marked defensive zones around supply depots, temporary landing fields, and the wreckage of craft that had not survived the descent. Some landed properly. Others struck the ground hard enough to shear landing gear away and plowed through stone and scrub before stopping in clouds of dust and burning promethium. The Minotaurs followed in disciplined waves. Their gunships did not scatter themselves across the planet in pursuit of individual targets. They came in mutually supporting formations, heavy bolters hammering ridgelines, while Lascannons stabbed at surviving armor, and missile batteries launched salvos against defensive concentrations identified from orbit. One Lamenter's position disappeared beneath 3 overlapping detonations, the first throwing bodies into the air, the second pulverizing the stone they landed upon, the third bursting so close to the ground that fragments of yellow ceramite travelled farther than any recognizable remains. Above it all, a section of escort vessel entered the atmosphere like a falling fortress, its outer plating glowing white before it broke apart. One fragment struck beyond the horizon. The explosion rolled across the land seconds later, flattening trees, collapsing primitive stone dwellings, and lifting a wall of dust high enough to blot out the stars. The people of Optera had no words for what came among them. Their settlements clung to valleys and high rock shelves where water gathered, structures of stone, timber, and beaten metal built by hands that had never touched a void ship. Men fled with crude weapons and bundles of possessions as transhuman giants descended upon their world in armor forged in orbital manufactoria. A Minotaur armored carrier crushed through one settlement without slowing, its tracks reducing walls, livestock, and fleeing figures to the same red mud. A Lamenters gunship passed low over another village while pursued by enemy fire. The sonic wake tore roofing from homes. A missile intended for the aircraft missed, crossed the valley, and detonated among huts packed against a cliff face. The entire shelf collapsed. The dead were not counted. Neither chapter had come to conquer those people. Neither hated them. They were simply small enough to be erased by weapons aimed at greater things. Veteran Sergeant. Imano landed with what remained of his force near a broken supply site, dug into a narrow valley beneath two black ridges. His armor still bore damage from the fighting aboard the Mater Lacrimarum. One eye lens had been replaced with a temporary plate after the transept collapse, leaving half his helm's peripheral display unreliable. His squad had changed around him without anyone formally acknowledging it. Brothers from the 7th Company stood beside survivors from 2 others because heraldic distinctions mattered less every hour. Chalice remained with him, his chestplate marked by fresh gouges. Brother Tamaron carried a missile launcher recovered from a dead warrior, whose name neither of them had known. 3 assault marines had joined them from a crippled Thunderhawk, jump packs blackened by re-entry heat. Imano examined the valley through magnified autosenses. "They will bring armor through the southern mouth," he said. "The ridge constricts line of fire there. They will not like it." Chalice looked toward him. "Which means they will destroy the ridge if we remain long enough." No one laughed. The Lamenters had learned to make terrain fight for them because they could not afford to meet the Minotaurs on open ground. Missile teams occupied high stone shelves, firing from behind natural cover before relocating through gullies too narrow for heavy vehicles. Surviving armored vehicles concealed themselves beneath overhangs, engines idling until Auspex contacts crossed pre-selected points. Assault squads waited behind ridges rather than charging the first enemy they saw, using jump packs for sudden lateral movement between firing positions. Storm ravens came in low enough that their engines threw curtains of dust across the ground, appearing beneath Minotaur air patrols before climbing sharply to rake armor columns and infantry concentrations. One pilot threaded his craft between 2 stone towers while autocannon fire chased him through the gap. The Storm Raven emerged with half its tail scorched away, fired into the rear armor of a Minotaur vehicle, then vanished behind the ridge before the enemy could answer. For a time, the ground itself gave the Lamenters what the void had denied them. The Minotaurs adapted. They did not keep sending tactical squads into the killing ground simply because the Lamenters held it. Heavy weapons appeared on the far ridges. Missile launchers and Lascanon teams established overlapping arcs. Whirlwind batteries farther back began striking the valley mouths, while armored vehicles advanced only after the high ground had been suppressed. Rock formations that provided excellent cover became targets rather than obstacles. A cliff face containing 3 Lamenters firing positions vanished beneath repeated bombardment. The first salvo cracked it. The second tore open the strata. The third brought half the mountain down. Yellow armored warriors disappeared beneath thousands of tons of stone without the Minotaurs ever needing to assault them.
Imano watched one such collapse through magnification and understood the pattern immediately. "They are dismantling the battlefield," he said. Chalice was loading a fresh magazine. "Then we move faster than they can break it. We will try." That was the closest thing to optimism either of them possessed. The Minotaur armored column entered the southern valley exactly where Imano expected. 3 heavy vehicles came first, followed by transports and bronze-armored infantry moving in the dead ground between them. The lead tank fired into the high ridge before any Lamenter exposed himself. Stone erupted. A second vehicle traversed its turret toward the opposite slope. Their guns overlapped. Their infantry remained behind armor until suppression fire began. Imano waited. The first missile struck the rear vehicle from above and damaged its track assembly. The second hit the lead tank's turret and detonated without penetrating. Minotaur return fire opened immediately. Now, the assault marines launched. Their jump packs ignited in thunder and hurled them from behind the ridge in long, low arcs rather than straight into the sky. One crossed the valley at a speed no mortal infantryman could follow, landed against the side of the damaged rear vehicle, and drove a melter bomb beneath the track guard. Another struck the ground behind a rock formation, rolled through the impact, and came up firing. Imano and the infantry moved through their
Rubble on foot, transhuman reflexes carrying them from cover to cover between bursts of heavy bolter fire. A mortal soldier would have needed seconds to assess each firing lane. Imano's enhanced cognition and armor systems did it in fractions of one. He saw the heavy weapon traverse, predicted its arc, and moved before the burst arrived. Brother Tamaron fired from one knee. The missile struck the transport behind the tanks and punched through the side armor. Flame erupted from the troop compartment. Bronze figures forced the rear ramp down through the fire, several already burning. They came out shooting. The damaged tank turned toward the assault marine clinging to its flank. Too slowly. The melter bomb detonated beneath the weapons arc. The vehicle seemed to fold inward around the blast before the rear quarter erupted. Burning promethium sprayed across the valley wall. Ammunition began cooking off inside the hull, each detonation punching new holes through already softened armor. One crewman climbed halfway through a hatch with his lower body on fire before an internal shell exploded and blew him apart from the waist down. His torso landed several meters away, still moving for a heartbeat, before another blast covered it in burning debris. The Lamenters charged the gap. Imano hit a Minotaur with his shoulder hard enough to crack both warriors' breastplates. The bronze Astartes raised a chainsword. Imano fired his bolter beneath the enemy's arm. The shell entered through the joint and detonated inside the chest. Blood burst through the neck seal. Chalice met another Minotaur blade to blade, caught the enemy's weapon against his own chainsword, and kicked him backward beneath the damaged tank's track. The Minotaur rolled aside before the track could crush him and fired from the ground. The burst caught Brother Tamaron across the abdomen. Yellow plate ruptured. Tamaron remained standing. His secondary heart continued pumping, even as part of his lower intestine spilled through the torn cuirass. He fired the missile launcher at point-blank range toward a Minotaur transport, dropped the empty weapon, and drew his bolt pistol. "Still useful," he said over the vox. A heavy bolter answered him. The burst hit before Imano could move. Tamaron's upper torso came apart. One round blew through his shoulder. Another detonated inside his neck. The third opened his head from jaw to crown, spraying bone and brain matter across the yellow armor of the brother behind him. His body fell without the missile launcher he had already discarded. Supporting Minotaur fire found the assault element moments later. One jump-equipped Lamenter was struck in mid-leap and spun through the air with half his pelvis destroyed. He hit the ground head first. Another lost a leg to concentrated bolter fire and landed hard enough to fracture his spine despite power armor. "Withdraw," Imano ordered. They had killed the tank. The Minotaurs had killed 4 brothers for it. The arithmetic remained obscene. Elsewhere across Optera, similar engagements burned themselves into the land. Lamenters smashed through stone doors with gauntleted fists when settlements or mine works offered defensible interiors. Minotaurs vaulted barricades that would have stopped armored mortals and kept fighting with bolt wounds buried in muscle and fused ribs. A wounded Lamenter carried a heavy weapon alone after its loader died, the gun's mass irrelevant to arms capable of bending steel. A Minotaur with one eye lens destroyed and blood flooding the other continued advancing by auspex alone until a crack missile struck his chest and tore him in half. Astartes were not immortal. The battlefield proved that every second. What made them monstrous was how much violence was required to remind the universe of the fact. Phoros came down during the 9th hour because command was beginning to fragment beyond what the Bark's failing Vox network could repair. His arrival was not announced by heralds. A battered Thunderhawk descended through smoke, one engine coughing flame, and landed behind a Lamenter's defensive line, already collapsing beneath Minotaur pressure. The ramp opened. Malakim Phoros came out first. Warriors who had believed him lost turned toward him. That hesitation nearly killed several. "Eyes forward," Phoros snapped. "I am not a relic." The line obeyed. He entered the battle at once. His presence moved through the survivors faster than any formal order. The chapter master fought with the compact brutality of an Astartes who had survived too many wars to mistake spectacle for victory. He put bolt rounds through vulnerable armor seams, used broken terrain to deny Minotaur firing lanes, and struck only when an opening existed. Yet something beneath the discipline had changed. Every dead brother seemed to tighten the muscles around his jaw. Every bronze-armored figure became easier to hate. Once, while crossing a shattered ridge, he saw a dying Lamenter reach toward him from beneath a slab of stone. The warrior's legs were gone. His chest plate had been peeled open. Phoros could do nothing for him. "Lord," the brother rasped. Phoros knelt for the smallest possible fraction of time. "For those we cherish," the dying warrior said. Phoros finished the chapter's ancient response. "We die in glory." The brother's hand fell. For a heartbeat, the battlefield changed around Phoros. The smoke became another sky. A golden figure fell. A traitor stood above him. Phoros blinked, and Optera returned. He rose with his weapon already firing. The next Minotaur died to 3 rounds in the throat. Moloch did not descend until the surface battle had been prepared for him. His vanguard had fixed the Lamenters along 3 ridgelines. Armor had closed the western valley. Gunships controlled the northern approaches. Devastator formations had established firing positions across the high ground. Only then did the teleport flare ignite behind the Lamenter's shrinking network of retreat routes. Light burned white across the stones. Asterian Moloch emerged from it with elite warriors around him. His Tartaros plate bore the scars of Cairo and Optera alike. The black spear rested in his hand. His storm shield came up before the teleport glare had faded completely. He had not thrown himself into the middle of the Lamenters. He had arrived exactly where his presence would turn retreat into encirclement. Imano saw the new bronze icons appear behind them. "Sergeant," Chalice said, "I see them. That is no line company." "No." Across the blasted valley, Phoros saw him. Hundreds of meters separated the chapter masters. Smoke rolled between them. Burning wreckage lay scattered across the low ground. Lamenters and Minotaurs continued killing one another along the slopes. Moloch turned his helm toward Phoros. For one instant, the battlefield seemed to demand a duel. 2 chapter masters, 2 bloodlines, 2 ideas of duty. Phoros raised his weapon. Moloch raised the black spear, not toward Phoros, toward the ridge beneath him. The Minotaur batteries fired. The first salvo obliterated the stone to Phoros's left. The second struck behind him. Heavy weapons walked explosions across the ridge in disciplined sequence, pulverizing cover, bodies and earth together. Phoros threw himself into the lee of a shattered outcrop as a missile detonated close enough to lift him from his feet. A Lamenter beside him vanished beneath the blast. Half the warrior landed 3 meters away. Phoros understood. Moloch had no interest in giving him the battle he wanted. No challenge, no ritual, no proof of superiority, only annihilation. By the 10th hour, the Lamenters' surface formations had been forced into separate pockets. Their surviving armor could no longer maneuver freely between valleys. Gunships that attempted reinforcement ran gauntlets of Minotaur anti-air fire. Above them, the fleet still burned. The Mater Lacrimarum remained under assault. Vox traffic came in fragments, some from warriors who no longer knew whether anyone was listening. A communications officer reached Foros through heavy interference. "Lord, Orbital confirms enemy formations are closing all remaining ground routes." "Objectives?" The officer hesitated. "Say it." "They are not seizing settlements. They are not fortifying the supply works. They are bypassing anything that does not affect our movement." Foros looked across the valley. Bronze icons tightened around yellow ones. The officer's voice returned through static. "My lord, I do not think they mean to take Optera." Foros watched another ridge disappear beneath bombardment. "No," he said. The truth had finally become too large to ignore. "They mean to take away every place we can run." The 10th hour began beneath a sky still burning with the remains of ships. The 10th hour of the Battle of Optera found Captain Numas standing beneath a sky that rained pieces of dead warships. Burning debris crossed the upper atmosphere in long white scars, while the ground shook beneath impacts too distant to see, and the valleys around him had become a geography of ruined stone, wrecked armor, and bodies in yellow and bronze. The Lamenters no longer possessed anything resembling a coherent battle line. They held fragments of ridges, collapsed supply works, sections of primitive road, and the blackened remains of landing grounds that had changed hands too many times for any warrior to remember who had first defended them. Vox interference came and went, with the movement of Minotaur jamming assets and the death of orbital relay systems. Two major Lamenters formations remained separated by a chain of hills the Minotaurs had seized less than an hour before, and the loss of that ground had severed communications between survivors trying to withdraw toward the same shrinking defensive zone. Numas had been ordered to reopen the route. There was nothing ceremonial in the task. No banner waited to be reclaimed, no relic demanded rescue, no enemy champion had issued challenge. Somewhere beyond the ridges were brothers who could no longer hear chapter command. If the corridor remained closed, Moloch would dismantle them in isolation. Numas studied the terrain through a cracked helm lens, listened to the irregular thunder of Minotaur guns, and understood that he had perhaps one opportunity before the enemy reinforced the position beyond his ability to break it. What gathered around him could no longer truthfully be called a company. Tactical Marines stood beside assault brothers, whose jump packs carried heraldry from formations Numas had not commanded at the beginning of the day. A Devastator had lost his squad and now carried a heavy bolter whose ammunition feed came from the corpse of a warrior 3 valleys away. 2 Lamenters bore repaired plate of mismatched yellow, one pauldron darker than the other, where field lacquer had been applied over ceramite taken from the dead. Another had sealed a hole through his thigh armor with emergency bonding compound that had hardened into an ugly black mass around the wound. Magazines were distributed by need rather than ownership. Brother sergeants opened ammunition pouches and counted bolt rounds into other men's hands. Crack grenades changed belts. A plasma pistol went to the warrior whose gauntlet could still interface with its ancient grip. An Inferno pistol taken from a dead veteran was entrusted to a tactical Marine who had never carried one before, but understood what it could do to terminate a plate at close range. Chainswords were checked by sound because there was no time to strip their housings. Broken teeth had been replaced where spare links existed. Where they did not, the weapons would bite unevenly until their mechanisms failed. Numas watched the redistribution without complaint. The chapter's careful order of squads, companies, and armories was dissolving beneath attrition. Survival had become its own organization. "Objective is the western saddle," Numas said over the local vox. His voice reached 32 battle brothers, and perhaps no one beyond them. "We open the route. We do not hold the ridge unless holding it keeps the route open. Suppression element engages first. Assault brothers strike on my mark. Do not chase retreating Minotaurs beyond the saddle." A veteran beside him glanced toward the distant ridge through magnification. "You expect them to yield?" Numas looked at the bronze icons appearing and vanishing through interference. "I expect them to do whatever costs us most." The veteran gave a single grunt of acknowledgement. That was enough. Numas raised one gauntlet. Heavy weapons settled into firing positions among the rocks. Missile launchers acquired range. The heavy bolter's barrel assembly began to rotate with a rising mechanical growl. Numas waited for the Minotaur patrol cresting the saddle to move one step farther into the exposed ground. "Fire!" The ridge erupted. Crack missiles struck first, one detonating against a Minotaur weapon emplacement and blowing the bronze-armored gunner from the parapet in pieces. Heavy bolter fire followed, mass reactive shells chewing through cover and forcing the defenders down. The Minotaurs answered immediately, but Numas had already moved his assault element. Jump packs ignited behind the lower rocks and hurled Lamenters across the valley in long, violent arcs. They did
not rise high enough to become easy targets. They skimmed the contours, vanishing behind stone before appearing almost on top of the enemy flank. The first Lamenter landed hard enough to crater the ground and drove his chainsword into a Minotaur before the bronze warrior completed his turn. Another hit the ridge behind two defenders and fired a bolt pistol into the back of one helmet at arm's reach. The shell penetrated and detonated, projecting blood, bone, and fragments of visor across the second warrior's faceplate. Numas advanced with the tactical line behind the covering fire, bolt rounds snapping past him in both directions. A Minotaur rose from behind a barricade. Numas shot him twice, first through the elbow joint and then beneath the gorget, when the wound twisted him sideways. The bronze warrior collapsed against the stones, with arterial blood pulsing between armor plates. The position broke faster than Numas had expected. Lamenter pressure struck from the front and flank together, giving the Minotaurs no clean firing line. One bronze warrior attempted to redeploy a missile launcher and was cut down before he could clear the emplacement. Another fired until a power sword took his arm at the shoulder, then tried to draw his sidearm with the remaining hand, before 3 bolt rounds entered his torso and detonated among his organs. The Lamenters drove through the saddle, with an aggression sharpened by 10 hours of retreat. For several minutes, the battle belonged to them. Minotaur icons vanished from the auspex. A captured heavy weapon was turned upon its former owners. The isolated formations beyond the ridge responded to newly restored Vox contact, their voices bursting through interference in fragments of relief and disbelief. Western route open. Signal confirmed. By the blood, we hear you. Numas permitted himself no smile, but something inside his chest loosened. He had spent the day watching choices disappear. For the first time, he had taken one back. Then the Minotaurs began retreating too cleanly. Numas saw it before his officers did. The bronze warriors did not break. They yielded. One squad withdrew from a stone shelf while firing in controlled pairs. Another abandoned a defensible trench without waiting for the Lamenters to close. They left ammunition behind, but no wounded. Their movement created a widening channel beyond the ridge, a route that pointed directly toward lower ground between 2 broken escarpments. "Captain," one sergeant said, "they are giving us the valley." Numas magnified the terrain. The route beyond offered a chance larger than the objective he had been assigned. If he drove through now, he could threaten the rear of another Minotaur line and potentially reconnect not merely 2 isolated groups, but half the surface survivors. Delay would allow Moloch to close it again. "We press," Numas said. The veteran beside him looked sharply toward him. "You ordered no pursuit?"
That was before they exposed the throat, or before they showed us where they want the blade. Numas knew the warning was justified. He also knew that refusing every opportunity because Moloch might have designed it was another form of paralysis. We advance by bounds. Heavy weapons remain on the saddle. Assault elements forward no farther than the second escarpment. If they turn on us, we withdraw under our own guns. The order went out. The Lamenters descended. The killing ground revealed itself only when the first thunderhammer struck. Bronze giants emerged from behind the escarpment, where Auspec's returns had been masked beneath jamming and the thermal wash of burning vehicles. Terminator Assault Squad. Zelaos advanced into the valley mouth with shields raised. Their artificer plate bore scars from the fighting in the void, some deep enough to expose blackened underlayers beneath bronze. Vedic pattern storm shields overlapped until they became a moving wall of metal and power fields. Stormlord pattern thunderhammers rose behind them. Tactical Minotaurs appeared simultaneously along the rocks to the Lamenters' rear. The retreat had not merely drawn Numas forward, it had placed him between two arms of the same weapon. "Back to the ridge," Numas shouted. The first Lamenter to turn died beneath bolter fire from behind. 3 shells entered his backplate. One detonated beside the spine and blew him forward with his lower body no longer responding. Another warrior dragged him behind cover and died when a 4th shell entered through his side. At the front, Zelaos's Terminators kept advancing. Lamenters fired everything they had. Bolt rounds burst against shields. Crack grenades detonated beneath armored boots. An Inferno pistol discharged at a range short enough to turn night into white fire. The shot struck a Terminator beneath the raised shield and burned through the upper thigh. Bronze plate became liquid. The warrior fell onto one knee as flesh and armor fused together, but his shield remained in position while the brothers beside him closed the gap. Another Lamenter drove a power axe into the joint of a Minotaur's arm. The field blade bit through plating and buried itself to the haft. The Terminator answered with a thunderhammer. The weapon struck the Lamenter's chest. Yellow armor burst outward. Ribs, lungs, and both hearts ceased to have separate shapes. The corpse crossed the compartment-sized gap between rocks and hit the ground as a broken shell wrapped around meat. The Lamenters tried to widen the fight, but the valley gave them nowhere to go. Shields forced them inward. Minotaur tactical fire kept them from retreating freely. The action became a compression of ceramite, blades and explosive rounds, where every warrior fought within a few meters of death. One Lamenter climbed onto a storm shield, fired his bolt pistol downward through the eye lenses of the Terminator behind it, and was caught by a second Minotaur's hammer before he could jump clear. The blow removed his lower body. He landed screaming, intestines trailing across the shield's rim, and still fired twice before a bronze boot crushed his skull. Another Lamenter emptied a bolter against the same damaged joint until the Terminator's arm failed and the shield dropped. 3 brothers rushed the opening. Zelaos himself met them. His hammer struck the first at the shoulder and drove armor fragments through the chest. He used the backswing to break the second warrior's knee, then allowed another Minotaur to finish him while he turned toward the third. Nothing in his movement suggested anger. He fought like a closing gate. Captain Numas reached Arklus in the middle of that slaughter. The Minotaur Terminator was already wounded. A deep burn crossed one side of his breastplate, where melter fire had struck without achieving full penetration, and blood seeped from beneath the lower rim. His storm shield bore a split along one edge. Numas's own armor was scarcely better. A bolt had cratered his left pauldron. One thigh plate had been torn away. Blood moved sluggishly beneath his gorget, from a wound he could no longer feel properly. They saw one another at the same instant, and neither issued challenge. Arklus came forward behind the shield. Numas fired. 2 bolt rounds burst against the shield face. The third struck the damaged edge and spun fragments away. Numas discarded the empty weapon rather than reload. His power blade ignited in his hand with a sharp blue glare. Arklus swung the thunderhammer in a low arc intended to break both legs. Numas moved inside it, fast enough that a mortal observer might have seen only a yellow blur. His blade struck beneath Arclus's arm. The power field sheared through weakened plating and opened flesh beneath. Arclus slammed the shield sideways. Numas took the impact against his shoulder and was thrown into the rocks hard enough to crack stone. The Minotaur followed. Numas rolled beneath the next hammer strike. The weapon hit ground and pulverized it, spraying both warriors with fragments. Around them, brothers died without pausing to watch. Numas came up close, too close for the hammer to generate its full arc, and drove his blade into the melter-burned section of Arclus's breastplate. The weapon entered. Arclus made a sound for the first time. Not pain, effort. Numas twisted the blade and tore it sideways. Bronze ceramite opened. Blood poured across Arclus's abdomen. Something inside the Terminator plate ruptured badly enough that warning tones became audible through the damaged helm. Numas struck again. The blade cut into Arclus's flank and broke free trailing flesh. The Minotaur staggered. Numas could have withdrawn. He did not. Perhaps he saw the entire dying chapter behind the bronze helm. Perhaps Arclus ceased, for that moment, to be a single enemy and became Optera itself, became the Minotaurs, became every brother who had vanished into the void, every wounded warrior abandoned aboard. The bark, every yellow body lying unrecognizable beneath the stones. Numas attacked with fury, no longer shaped entirely by doctrine. The power blade rose. Arclus used the broken shield. He drove it into Numas's weapon arm and pinned the limb against the rock wall. The captain tore free, leaving strips of armor behind. Arclus's hammer came around with almost no room to swing. Numas avoided the head. He did not avoid the haft. The reinforced weapon struck his helm hard enough to crack it. Numas stumbled. Arclus stepped forward despite the blood pouring from his ruined torso. The thunder hammer rose one last time. Numas drove the power blade through Arclus's side. The hammer fell. It struck Captain Numas across the upper chest and neck. The power field discharged at impact. His breastplate imploded. The left side of his ribcage collapsed inward. His neck broke beneath the force, and his helm snapped sideways at an angle no living Astartes could survive. Blood burst from the gorget seal in a pressurized sheet. Numas remained standing for an instant because Arclus's ruined armor and his own blade held both warriors together. Then the captain fell. Arclus took one step backward, another. The power sword remained lodged through his flank. He dropped onto one knee. A Minotaur moved toward him. "Brother." Arclus raised one hand, still functional. It was technically true. So the Minotaur left him there and returned to the battle. The Lamenters saw Numas fall. 3 attempted to reach him. The first died before touching the captain, bolt rounds striking his side and detonating through the abdominal cavity. The second reached the body and seized Numas by the rear armor handle. He dragged the dead captain across the stones, while Minotaur fire followed him. A round entered his calf. Another struck the lower back. He continued moving until a third penetrated beneath the shoulder blade and exploded inside his chest. He collapsed over Numas, still gripping the armor. The third brother did not retreat. He stood above both bodies with a chainsword and bolt pistol, firing until the pistol locked empty. Then he charged the Terminators. Zalaos killed him. The Thunderhammer took him in the abdomen. His body folded around the impact. The next blow finished what the first had begun. 2 surviving Lamenters reached Numas, only after supporting fire forced the Minotaurs behind their shields. They hauled the captain away together, stepping over the brother who had died trying to do the same. Neither checked for life. The angle of Numas's head told them everything. The Lamenters withdrew from the killing ground. The corridor they had opened began closing behind them. When the fighting finally moved past the valley, Zalaos stood among the casualties and received reports from a squad that was no longer whole. Porphio had already been lost to the void during the earlier boarding actions. Kolkis had suffered wounds severe enough that his armor's internal systems were keeping him upright more reliably than his body. Liania's had been crushed beneath a close-range impact that had shattered plate, bone, and organs together. He lived, though whether he would ever walk outside a sarcophagus again was beyond the knowledge of anyone on that field. Arkless remained conscious for several more minutes. Then his primary heart failed. His secondary heart compensated. Then that failed as well. Zelaos looked down at him once. Gene seed recovery when possible. That was the eulogy. A Minotaur sergeant approached. Command structure on the western line has collapsed. Captain Helicon is dead. 2 other officers are unresponsive. Zelaos glanced toward the tactical runes. Then their formation's answer to me. By what authority? Zelaos raised the hammer. The authority of an unfinished battle. No one questioned him. The report of Captain Numus's death reached Malakim Foros during the final moments of the 12th hour. He stood inside a half-collapsed command shelter while Minotaur shells struck the ridgeline outside. Dust fell from the ceiling with every impact. A Vox officer repeated the message because the first transmission had been broken by static. Captain Numas confirmed fallen lord. Body recovered. Foros said nothing. The officer waited. The chapter master stared at the tactical display where another command rune had gone dark. At last he asked, "How many captains remain able to command?" No one answered immediately. That silence told him enough. Then the Minotaur bombardment began again. The 12th hour of the Battle of Optera found the Mater Lacrimarum dying by compartments. The ancient bark still possessed atmosphere, power, and weapons across much of her vast body, but she no longer possessed unity. Her internal transit ways had been cut into islands of resistance by Minotaur boarding parties, collapsed transepts, and deliberately sealed bulkheads. Whole decks had gone black where generators failed, leaving chapter serfs to stumble through darkness, guided by emergency phosphor strips and the distant concussion of Astartes warfare. Others burned beneath permanent red illumination because damage alarms had been sounding for so long that the color had ceased to signify emergency and become simply the light by which men died. The deepest surviving gene seed reliquaries remained beyond the sepulchral way, a fortified succession of armor galleries, shrine corridors, and adamantium doors built precisely because the genetic future of a chapter could not be entrusted to ordinary walls. The approaches were defended by everything the Lamenters could still gather: wounded veterans, apothecaries with bolt pistols drawn beside their Narthesia, tactical brothers whose original squads no longer existed, heavy weapons specialists carrying ammunition scavenged from the dead, and mortal serfs who knew perfectly well that the first mass-reactive shell to strike them would leave little worth burying. The survivors had stopped expecting rescue. Their task had become simpler and more terrible. The vaults must not fall. Asterian Moloch came for them because the resistance had lasted long enough to justify his presence. He had left the surface once Minotaur armor and gunships had closed the principal withdrawal routes and returned to the bark through a teleport lock established by breachers who had spent hours carving a path toward the inner decks. He did not come alone. Terminators advanced with him, their armor marked by fresh damage and old battle honors. Breacher squads followed beneath boarding shields. Tech Marines moved behind them with servo arms, melter cutters and Auspex systems tuned to identify reinforcement behind walls. Heavy weapon teams occupied captured junctions before the advance began, laying firing solutions through corridors the first assault waves had paid to map with their lives. The attack formed not around Moloch's personal glory, but around sequence. Suppression fire first, breachers second, terminators into whatever refused to die, tactical warriors through the openings, tech marines behind them to corrupt doors, disable defense cogitators, and turn captured systems against their builders. Moloch stood at the center of it all with the black spear resting in his gauntlet and his heraldic storm shield held slightly forward. His Tartaros pattern armor was already scarred from Cairo, the Void War, and the surface fighting below.
New damage would join the old before the hour was done. The Lamenters opened fire before the first Minotaur entered the sepulchral way. Bolter rounds struck the forward shields in a sustained hammering that filled the corridor with overlapping detonations and ricocheting fragments. A plasma gun fired from behind a broken shrine pillar. The discharge crossed the passage as a blue-white sun and struck Moloch's storm shield hard enough to flare the protective field into brilliance. The impact staggered even him by half a pace. Warning sigils erupted across his helm display. The second plasma shot came before the first glare faded. Moloch turned the shield and caught most of it, but not all. Superheated plasma washed across the edge of his left pauldron and burned through layers already weakened by previous battle damage. Ceramite blackened, blistered, and tore open. Heat punched through beneath it. Flesh cooked. Blood struck the inside of his armor before internal systems flooded the wound with coagulant and analgesic compounds. Moloch's left arm slowed for one fraction of a second. Then it moved again. The Lamenters saw the wound. They saw the enormous bronze warrior remain upright. More fire converged upon him at once. Plasma recess, upper left, a Minotaur veteran warned. Moloch had already marked it. Suppress. Heavy bolters opened from behind the Terminator line. The wall around the plasma gun vanished beneath mass reactive impacts, stone icons of dead Lamenters.
Shattered. A mortal serf behind the position was caught by fragments and opened from throat to groin, collapsing beneath a curtain of his own intestines. The Lamenter gunner remained alive long enough to fire again. His shot struck a Terminator beside Moloch and burned through the warrior's breastplate. The Minotaur fell backward, trailing smoke. His secondary heart continued for several seconds before the thermal damage inside his thorax exceeded even Astarte's physiology. The warriors around him stepped over the corpse. Moloch raised the black spear and pointed at the position. A breacher charge struck the wall beneath it. The detonation turned the firing recess into a crater. When the smoke cleared, the plasma gun was gone. The Minotaurs reached melee range beneath a storm of bolt fire. The first Lamenter came through the smoke, with a chainsword screaming in both hands, striking not at Moloch, but at the damaged section of his armor. Moloch caught the weapon against the storm shield. Chain teeth screamed across the energized face, spraying sparks and broken metal. The Lamenter planted one boot, released one hand, and brought a power fist around toward Moloch's wounded shoulder. The blow would have torn the joint apart had it landed. Moloch drove the black spear forward before it could. The point entered beneath the Lamenter's gorget, punched through neck seals, spine and rear armor, then continued into the bronze devotional screen behind him. The warrior convulsed on the haft. Blood poured down the spear. His chainsword continued running uselessly against the shield until Moloch twisted his wrist and broke the neck completely. Bolter fire struck from farther down the passage. Moloch did not immediately withdraw the spear. He turned instead, dragging the impaled Lamenter with him. Mass reactive rounds struck the corpse. One burst inside the dead warrior's back. Another tore through the shoulder. Yellow ceramite and flesh exploded outward, but the ruined body absorbed enough of the volley for Moloch to cross 2 more steps. Only when the corpse impeded his advance did he kick it from the spear and let what remained collapse beneath Minotaur boots. There was no flourish, no threat, no contemptuous declaration. Moloch killed as a siege engine breached a wall, because the wall existed between him and the objective. His storm shield struck the next Lamenter across the helm and lifted him from his feet. Before the warrior landed, the black spear entered beneath his arm and came out through the opposite pauldron in a spray of blood. Moloch tore the weapon free and turned into a third defender whose power sword had already cut deeply into the armor of a Minotaur Terminator. The spear entered through the warrior's damaged abdominal plate. The tip emerged through his back, carrying loops of intestine and fragments of fused rib. Moloch shoved the dying Marine sideways into another defender and advanced through them both. Around him, the corridor became a slaughter chamber. Thunder hammers struck yellow armor and collapsed torsos into shapeless ruin. Lamenter chainswords found Minotaur joints and tore limbs free amid showers of bronze fragments. A wounded Minotaur fought from one knee after losing half his foot, firing his Stormbolter until a Lamenter power blade entered through his visor and split his skull to the base of the neck. The Lamenters did not face Moloch one at a time. They knew who he was. They understood what solitary heroics would accomplish. A sergeant's command flashed across their local net, and 6 brothers attacked together. 2 fired bolters, while another threw crack grenades toward Moloch's feet. A power axe wielder came from the right. A chainsword brother struck from the left. The 6th carried a melter weapon and waited for the storm shield to turn. The grenades detonated first. Moloch took one blast on the shield, but the second exploded behind his forward leg and staggered him. Bolter rounds struck his breastplate. One entered a joint housing near the hip and detonated inside. His armor alarms became a choir. The chainsword hit his right forearm and chewed deep enough to expose internal cabling. Moloch answered with the shield, smashing the attacker sideways, but the power axe came down against his shoulder before he could recover. The weapon bit through the rim of the pauldron and sent pain through half his torso. The melter gunner fired. A Minotaur Terminator stepped between them. The blast took him in the chest. For an instant, he became white light enclosed within bronze. Then the armor collapsed inward, and the warrior fell burning at Moloch's feet. Moloch used the death immediately. He advanced through the wash of heat before the Lamenter gunner could cycle the weapon. The black spear crossed the distance first. It entered beneath the gunner's breastplate and lifted him bodily against the wall. A second Minotaur killed the power axe bearer with a Stormbolter burst through the groin seal. Another bronze warrior died as the remaining Lamenters pressed into the opening. The attack damaged Moloch, staggered him, and killed 2 of his escort. It also placed the defenders inside the range, where his strength, armor, and spear mattered most. He broke the chainsword brother's wrist with the shield rim, thrust through the warrior behind him, and stepped over both before the first had finished falling. Imano received the reports from 3 compartments away and felt no triumph at the Minotaur losses. "They wounded Moloch," Chalice said beside him, relaying a fragment from one of the surviving defenders. "Possibly badly." Imano checked the collapsing tactical display. "Is he dead?" "No." "Then nothing has changed." The truth of it sickened him. The Lamenters had killed Minotaurs by the score across the last hours. They had destroyed armor, gunships, and boarding craft. They had crippled vessels in the void and broken bronze warriors upon the rocks of Optera. They had traded life for life, sometimes better than life for life. It no longer mattered. They had entered the battle already diminished. The Minotaurs had brought the concentrated strength of their chapter and were willing to spend it. Every yellow rune that disappeared represented a fraction of a force that could not be replaced before the war ended. Every bronze rune might be mourned later if the Minotaurs bothered with mourning, but another still existed behind it. The horror was not that the Lamenters lacked courage. It was that courage had no arithmetic capable of saving them. Aboard the captured junction behind Moloch, a Minotaur officer transmitted casualty projections. Western assault vector has lost more than half effective strength. Remaining elements request consolidation. Moloch was still advancing when the message reached him. Blood from the wound beneath his pauldron had run down one side of his cuirass and dried there. "Continue the vector," he said. The officer hesitated only long enough to calculate what the order meant. "For how long?" Moloch checked the tactical chronometer. 200 heartbeats. They may not survive that interval. They do not need to. The channel closed. The Western Minotaur assault resumed. Lamenter defenders there had already begun to believe the attack was failing. When the bronze warriors came again, depleted and unsupported, the Lamenters committed what remained of their heavy weapons to annihilate them. Plasma fire illuminated the corridor. Melter blasts tore open shields and armor. A Minotaur was cut in half at the waist. Another lost both arms and continued advancing until a bolt entered his visor. The survivors died within sight of the barricade. Their deaths revealed every weapon that had killed them. Moloch's supporting batteries fired. Heavy bolter streams punched through the marked positions. A Lascannon fired through a pre-breached maintenance wall and struck the plasma team from the side. The first Lamenter vanished above the abdomen. The second was thrown against the bulkhead, with both legs removed. Missiles entered the melter position a heartbeat later and turned the barricade into a storm of yellow ceramite, blood, and stone. 200 heartbeats had not been necessary. Moloch entered the next chamber through the absence those deaths had purchased. The innermost defenders were waiting around the gene seed access doors. Apothecaries stood among them. One carried a narthecium slick with the blood of brothers whose progenoids he had harvested during the retreat. Another held a bolt pistol in one hand and a power blade in the other. Caskets containing the genetic inheritance of the chapter were being moved through the final vault, while Calyx priests sealed internal reliquaries behind them. No one mistook what was at stake. A wounded Lamenter leaned against the vault gate. You take another step, and you tread upon Sanguinius's blood. Moloch looked at the sealed doors. The black spear lowered slightly. Open.
Them! The warrior laughed, though blood bubbled through the damaged grille of his helm. Come and ask him yourself. The Lamenters fired. The final defense lasted less than 10 minutes and killed enough Minotaurs to fill the sanctum floor. It did not save the vault. Breaches shattered the outer locking mechanism. Tech Marines cut power to the defensive field. Terminators held the threshold beneath fire until the doors could be forced apart. One apothecary killed a Minotaur with a bolt pistol shot through the eye lens, then severed another warrior's hand with his power blade before Moloch's spear entered his chest. He remained standing while the black spear passed through him. "Our sons," he rasped, blood flooding his mouth. "You will not have them." Moloch withdrew the spear. The apothecary fell. Moloch looked beyond him at the gene seed caskets. "Secure all viable stock." A Minotaur captain turned toward him. "Destroy nothing? Nothing usable. Armor? Inventory? Weapons? Inventory. Reliquaries?" Moloch's gaze moved across the chamber, where names, bloodlines, and relic inscriptions covered the walls. Material is material. For the Lamenters who heard him, the words were worse than desecration. The things stored there were not material. They were brothers unborn, dead heroes. Relics carried through centuries of rejection and survival. Armor marked by hands that had died wearing the same bleeding heart. Blades once raised beneath the name of Sanguinius. Moloch regarded all of it as captured assets. By the 14th hour, the sanctum belonged to the Minotaurs. The chamber looked less conquered than butchered. Yellow and bronze bodies lay together beneath broken reliquaries. Blood ran through grooves cut into the floor for ritual incense and pooled around the greaves of the living. One Minotaur Terminator sat dead against a pillar, with half his helm missing. A Lamenter lay across him, torso opened from throat to pelvis. Another body had been crushed so completely beneath a thunderhammer that pieces of yellow ceramite protruded from what remained like fragments of shell embedded in meat. Smoke hung beneath the vaulted ceiling. Emergency lumens flickered through it. Asterian Moloch stood among the dead. His storm shield was cratered and burned. One shoulder of his Tartaros plate had been scorched nearly black. A gouge crossed his breastplate. Another had opened the armor at his hip. Blood ran slowly down the haft of the black spear and dripped from its point onto the floor. A Minotaur officer approached through the wreckage. Gene seed vault secured, Lord. Armory intelligence is being extracted. Remaining Lamenter command elements have withdrawn toward the inner transit network and surface concentrations. Moloch looked once at the bodies around him. Not long enough to count them. "Which objective has the highest probability of ending the battle?" the officer answered. Moloch turned toward the next war. The 14th hour began. The 14th hour of the Battle of Optera began with Malachim Foros
accepting that there would be no victory. The admission did not come as despair. Despair had possessed no strategic value, and therefore had been denied entry to his thoughts for as long as he remained capable of command. It came instead as arithmetic, cold and unavoidable. The Mater Lacrimarum was crippled and cut into warring compartments. The Minotaurs possessed portions of the Gene Vault approaches and had already begun stripping captured armories of anything that could be carried away. The Lamenters' fleet had ceased to exist as a unified formation, its surviving vessels either damaged, boarded or trapped inside overlapping Minotaur firing solutions. On Optera IV, his companies had become pockets, each one shrinking beneath armor, gunships and bombardment. Captain Numas was dead. Other captains had vanished into static. Ammunition reports were becoming absurdly small. Some squads possessed more blades than bolt rounds. If Foros continued fighting, as he had fought for the preceding 14 hours, Moloch would grind the chapter down piece by piece until nothing remained except prisoners, gene seed, and yellow armor stacked within Minotaur holds. Therefore, he would stop fighting the battle Moloch had constructed. He would break every surviving formation against the enemy at once and turn the entire Optera theater into confusion. The Lamenters did not need to win. They needed one breach, one vessel escaping the fleet cordon, one surface force reaching an intact extraction point, one route through which some fragment of the chapter might live. Foros keyed the remaining command vox himself. All surviving Lamenters elements receive final maneuver order. Void formations will strike outward on independent vectors. Surface formations attack the nearest point of Minotaur containment. Forces aboard the bark counterboard toward launch and propulsion sectors. Do not preserve reserves. There are none. We create passage, or we die where we stand. Static answered him before voices began returning one after another. Fifth acknowledges. Seventh receives. Gunship elements receive. By your will, Chapter Master. No one asked what followed if the attack failed. The chapter was already coming apart in another way. The sons of Sanguinius had carried their father's death within their blood for millennia, a memory without memory, an ancient psychic wound capable of swallowing the present beneath the final moments upon the vengeful spirit. The Lamenters had spent generations believing themselves less afflicted than other descendants of the angel, spared or diminished in the curse that haunted their lineage. Optera stripped away that certainty with every dead brother. Apothecaries reported warriors whose pupils no longer focused upon the men before them, whose mouths formed names belonging to the heresy rather than the Badab war. Others became consumed by the red thirst without fully passing into madness, their restraint fraying beneath the scent of blood until every heartbeat nearby became an invitation. Those who crossed entirely into the black rage were marked as best the chapter could manage under siege. Pieces of armor were blackened with pigment, soot, or whatever remained to hand. Some never received the full rite. They did not care. They were no longer fighting Minotaurs upon Optera. They stood in the last age of legend. Bronze armor became the plate of traitors. Moloch's bull became the eye of Horus. Broken corridors became the halls in which Sanguinius had fallen. Their tragedy was not that they became cowards or beasts. It was that they became heroes in a war that had ended 10,000 years before, at the exact hour their living brothers most desperately needed soldiers capable of obeying orders. The first Death Company attack struck a Minotaur line aboard the Mater Lacrimarum so violently that an entire bronze squad disappeared from the tactical network before nearby formations understood what had happened. 6 black-armored Lamenters came through a maintenance transept already under fire, running into bolter volleys without breaking stride. The first took 2 rounds through the abdomen. One exploded beneath his cuirass and threw loops of intestine from the ruptured plate, yet he continued forward with a chainsword raised above his head. The second lost a pauldron and most of the flesh beneath it. The third received a bolt through the cheek that tore half his jaw away. None slowed. Their Vox channel carried only fragments of another age. For terror, Father, the War Master, kill the traitor. They struck the Minotaurs with the momentum of armored vehicles. One black-armored warrior caught a bronze battle brother by the throat and drove him backward into a bulkhead, striking the Minotaur's helm with repeated fists until ceramite fractured and the skull inside collapsed. Another drove a chainsword across a Minotaur's abdomen and held it there while the teeth ripped through plate, fused ribs and organs, showering the deck with blood and minced tissue. A bronze warrior fired a bolt pistol into his attacker's chest at contact range. The Lamenter jerked beneath 3 internal detonations, then seized the pistol hand and broke the wrist before biting down against the Minotaur's exposed gorget with enough force to tear flesh free. The compartment became slick beneath them, coolant from ruptured pipes mixed with blood and pulverized organs until mag boots splashed through a red-grey paste. The Minotaur's first response was instinctive and costly. 2 warriors advanced to meet the black-armored Lamenters blade to blade. Both died. One lost his helmet and the head inside it beneath repeated chainsword blows. The other thrust his combat blade into a Death Company warrior's heart and discovered that destroying one heart did not end an Astartes quickly enough when the second was. Still hammering in madness, the dying Lamenter dragged the Minotaur closer and drove his forehead through the bronze warrior's faceplate before both collapsed together. Then Moloch's order reached the line. Withdraw 20 meters, shields at the secondary junction, bolter lanes overlap, anti-armor weapons forward, no challenges, no pursuit. The Minotaurs obeyed. They abandoned ground rather than feed brothers into frenzy. Black-armored Lamenters charged after them because the rage allowed no other answer. The corridor narrowed. Vedic shields appeared across the far junction. Bolters began firing from behind them in staggered ranks. The first Death Company warrior crossed half the distance before concentrated rounds broke both knees and opened his torso. He crawled onward with one arm. A heavy weapon finished him. The next reached the shield line and buried a chainsword in its edge before a thunderhammer struck from behind the wall and reduced his upper body to broken armor wrapped around liquefied organs. Another survived long enough to climb onto the shield formation before a melter weapon fired from the flank and burned a hole through him large enough to see the corridor beyond. Within minutes, the fury that had annihilated the first Minotaur squad had been converted into corpses by geometry. Moloch listened to the casualty summary while a tech marine sealed the worst breach in his damaged Tartaros plate. The chapter master neither praised the defenders nor condemned those who had first met the Death Company in close combat. They expend control for violence, he said. Therefore deny them targets until their violence enters prepared fire. A captain beside him watched another black rune appear on the tactical display. They are still dangerous. Moloch turned his helm toward the icon. Everything here is dangerous. That is why we use doctrine. On the surface, Phoros led the counterstroke himself. Lamenters emerged from shattered valleys and burned supply works in attacks that should have been impossible for formations so depleted. Surviving storm ravens screamed overhead beneath Minotaur anti-air fire, while assault marines crossed ridges in low, jump-assisted bounds. Damaged armor moved until engines seized. Tactical brothers fired magazines almost empty of ammunition, then took bolt rounds from the dead as they advanced. Phoros remained near the center of the attack, not because he believed the chapter needed to see him, but because command relays were failing and orders traveled farther when spoken through living sergeants than through dying networks. He killed a Minotaur at close range with a burst beneath the gorget, pivoted as another came over a stone barricade and drove him back with a power weapon strike that opened bronze plate along the ribs. The Minotaur answered with a combat blade. Phoros caught the wrist, broke it, and fired through the warrior's visor. The bolt detonated inside the skull. Blood and brain matter erupted through the broken rear of the helm. Phoros stepped past the corpse and saw the sky change. For a heartbeat, Optera was gone. The smoke above him became the darkness of a ship older than his chapter. The broken ridge beneath his boots became metal. A golden form knelt ahead, wings torn and bright armor ruined. Something vast stood over him, a shadow in plate, a face loved once, betrayal made flesh. Foros heard a name inside his skull that no one on Optera had spoken. Horus. His hearts accelerated, his mouth filled with the taste of blood. Every Minotaur ahead of him seemed suddenly too small, too bronze, wrong. The enemy was not there. The enemy was beyond them. The enemy had killed his father. The enemy had always been waiting. "Lord!" The voice reached him from impossibly far away. Foros raised his weapon toward a figure he almost no longer recognized as one of his own. The vision broke. A Lamenter sergeant stood before him, helm cracked, staring at his chapter master. Foros lowered the weapon. "Continue the advance," he said. The sergeant hesitated for less than a heartbeat. "By your will." Foros followed, and no one mentioned what had nearly happened. In the void, the counterattack achieved what desperation sometimes achieved when probability had already declared the battle lost. A crippled Lamenters cruiser, whose engines could no longer provide meaningful escape thrust, redirected everything that remained into one final acceleration. Its captain drove the vessel toward a Minotaur escort, attempting to close the southern route. The bronze ship fired continuously as the cruiser approached. Lance beams opened the Lamenter's vessel along its spine. Macro shells smashed gun decks and killed thousands of mortal crewmen inside compartments that never received evacuation orders because there was nowhere to evacuate to. The cruiser continued. Its prow struck the Minotaur ship beneath the command superstructure. Armor designed to endure orbital bombardment folded under millions of tons of mass. Both vessels became locked together as plasma conduits burst and atmosphere jetted from kilometer-long wounds. Elsewhere, Lamenter's Thunderhawks entered a Minotaur launch bay behind a boarding wave, firing heavy bolters and lascannons into fuel lines, parked craft and ammunition cradles. One gunship died beneath defensive fire and crashed across the deck, but the second landed hard enough to buckle its gear. The Lamenters inside disembarked directly into battle, storming a weapons access deck and killing the gunnery servitors before bronze reinforcements arrived. For several minutes, one Minotaur battery ceased firing entirely. Moloch's tactical display changed, not catastrophically, enough. "Reserve cohort required at launch sector," an officer reported. "Boarding control on vessel tertiary has failed. Southern escort group requests support." Moloch stared at the runes he had intended to preserve for the final assault upon the bark. "Commit them." The officer knew the significance. All of them? Enough to restore the line. For the first time since the trap had closed, Moloch spent strength he had not planned to spend. The Daughter of Tempests entered the center of the violence with Malakim Foros aboard after a Thunderhawk extraction carried him from the surface to the embattled vessel. The transfer had been demanded by necessity rather than prestige. The remaining fleet needed direct command, while Vox relays died around them, and the battle barge still possessed enough functioning systems to serve as a weapon. Foros reached its strategium, while bloodied serfs hauled corpses from the command tiers and damaged sirens screamed through the deck. The vessel's master reported void shield collapse along 2 quadrants, fires in the lower gun decks, and unstable reactor feeds. "Can we still fire?" Foros asked. "Yes, Lord." "Can we still maneuver?" The mortal officer looked toward the helm. For a time, Foros studied the fleet projection. The opening created by the desperate counterstroke was already narrowing. "Then we have a time." The Daughter of Tempests turned broadside to the nearest Minotaur formation and fired everything that remained. Macro batteries thundered. Lances burned across the void. Torpedoes left damaged tubes so close together that 2 collided after launch and became a premature sun against the darkness. The surviving salvos struck Minotaur shields and forced the bronze vessels to scatter. Lamenter's craft tried to exploit the disruption. For a moment, the battle barge became the center around which the chapter's survival might still turn. Then, the first internal fire reached an ammunition transfer magazine. The detonation killed 3 gun decks. The second traveled through an already damaged conduit network and ruptured containment deeper within the ship. Warning runes flooded the strategium. Mortal officers shouted over one another. Foros turned toward the reactor display as half of it vanished in static. Seal the lower spine. Controls unresponsive. Vent it. Venting systems are gone. A new vibration entered the deck, too deep to be weapons fire. The Daughter of Tempests was breaking from within. The explosion began somewhere beneath them and became apocalyptic before anyone could name its source. Kilometers of warship armor flexed outward as internal pressure found weaknesses opened by hours of bombardment. Gun batteries disappeared inside incandescent fire. Entire decks ceased to exist. Thousands of mortal crew died in the first seconds, some vaporized where they stood, others crushed as bulkheads folded or torn into the void when the hull opened around them. Astartes fighting Minotaurs in boarding compartments were hurled together into space, still locked in combat when atmosphere took them. One Lamenter struck the outer hull, spinning end over end, mag boot catching for an instant before the plate beneath him tore free as well. Another remained alive inside armor, whose lower half had been destroyed, drifting among burning debris while his emergency beacon transmitted to ships already too damaged to recover him. The strategium tilted violently. Foros struck the command rail. The deck split. Fire crossed the chamber. His last transmitted order dissolved beneath static before any receiver could confirm its meaning. Then, the Daughter of Tempests broke open. From the surface of Optera, the 4th, veteran Sergeant Imano saw the battle barge become a second dawn. The flash illuminated every ridge and corpse around him. His auto-senses dimmed automatically. A heartbeat later, the Vox channel filled with overlapping alarms. Then command traffic collapsed into nonsense. 7th Company, withdraw toward Eastern. Another voice cut across it. All surface forces hold present ground until... Then a third transmission screamed through both. Chapter command orders immediate advance to extraction site. Imano stopped behind a shattered wall. Chalice looked toward him. Which order? Imano listened. Static. Sergeant? Imano tried the command frequency. Nothing. He tried the fleet net. Nothing. He tried Foros's command ident. Nothing. For the first time in his service, the chapter possessed no voice. Local command only, Imano said. We move according to what we can see. What can you see? Imano looked across the valley, where bronze armor advanced through smoke. The enemy. That would have to be enough. Aboard the Minotaur flagship, casualty projections continued to climb. Moloch's armor remained damaged from the Gene Vault assault. Blood had dried beneath one shoulder seal. Several of the formations he had held for the last operation were now fighting elsewhere, because Foros's counterstroke had forced their deployment. The Minotaurs had lost brothers, armor, aircraft, and ships. Multiple objectives remained contested. The Lamenters had inflicted wounds that another enemy might have mistaken for reason to halt. The reports ended. Moloch considered the tactical display. Counterattack expenditure? He asked. Declining across all theaters. Their void offensive has stalled. Surface formations are fragmenting. Central command signal disappeared with the destruction of the Daughter of Tempests. Foros? Unconfirmed. Moloch did not ask again. A chronologium rune advanced. The 16th hour had begun. 1 hour remained before the battle reached the duration by which Imperial records would remember it. Moloch lifted the black spear from beside the strategium table. Begin the final operation. The final hour of the Battle of Optera did not begin with greater noise. It began with exhaustion. The Mater Lacrimarum had screamed for so long that even catastrophe had become familiar, and the warriors still living within her moved through ruin with the mechanical persistence of men who had forgotten what it felt like not to hurt. Ammunition counters blinked warnings across cracked helm displays. Power armor joints responded fractions of a second slower as damaged fiber bundles and overworked servos fought against accumulated trauma. Bolter mechanisms fouled with ash, dried blood, and powdered ceramite. Chainswords skipped where teeth had broken. Vox channels had become graveyards of dead identifiers, repeating fragments of commands from officers who no longer existed. The ancient bark herself seemed to breathe in dying spasms. Gravity faltered without warning. Lumen strips flickered between red emergency illumination and darkness. Air tasted of propellant, burning insulation, coolant, and the sweet metallic corruption of too much blood sealed inside too little atmosphere. Men had fought over the same corridors so many times that there were places where boots no longer struck deck plating at all, only layered corpses and armor fragments compressed beneath the weight of passing Astartes. Yet as the Lamenters slowed, the Minotaurs accelerated. Moloch understood fatigue as he understood every other battlefield condition, a resource that mattered only when one side allowed the other time to recover from it. Another hour might allow the Lamenters to establish new command relays, redistribute ammunition, consolidate survivors, or recover even a portion of their cohesion. He intended to deny them that hour. From the Minotaur command network came a final sequence of orders, stripped of rhetoric and almost entirely devoid of words unnecessary to killing. Propulsion control, launch infrastructure, command nexus, remaining gene seed chambers. 4 objectives. Simultaneous seizure. The Mater Lacrimarum was no longer to be treated as a target for destruction. She had become materiel. Her hull, surviving gun batteries, armories, reliquaries, and whatever else remained useful would belong to those capable of taking them. Moloch divided the assault accordingly. Breacher formations attacked propulsion from routes mapped during earlier fighting. Terminators drove toward command through the central transepts. Tactical squads and tech marines pushed for the launch decks, not merely to prevent escape, but to preserve whatever gunships remained serviceable. The gene seed sectors received the most precise instructions of all. Resistant defenders were to be killed. Apothecaries were to be taken alive if practical. Storage chambers were to be secured intact wherever possible. Moloch had no interest in exterminating warriors who could become prisoners once their resistance ceased. Dead enemies could not be interrogated, disarmed, transported, or displayed as proof of submission. The distinction was not mercy, it was efficiency. A Lamenter who still possessed a weapon was a target. A Lamenter on his knees without one was an asset under guard. Veteran Sergeant Imano had 7 battle brothers left when the final operation reached his sector. He could no longer remember how many had stood with him when the first boarding alarm sounded. The number seemed to belong to another life. They held a junction leading toward one of the inner transit arteries, a place ornamented with battered reliefs showing forgotten Lamenters' campaigns, and now barricaded with ammunition crates, broken statuary, and 2 Minotaur corpses dragged into position because dead Terminator plates stopped bolt fire better than stone. Brother Chalas still lived. His armor was split along the ribs, and one gauntlet no longer responded fully, but he stood beside Imano, with his chainsword resting against one shoulder. Brother Selman fired from the barricade until his bolter gave the empty mechanical click every Astartes knew before the warning rune appeared. He checked the magazine well by instinct, found nothing, looked once toward Imano, and drew his combat blade. No rounds. Imano reached toward the pouch at his hip and found it empty. Selman gave a brief nod. Then I require none. He vaulted the barricade before Imano could forbid him. The Minotaurs were already advancing through the opposite smoke. Selman reached the first bronze warrior and drove his knife beneath the gorget. The blade entered flesh, but stopped against reinforced bone. The Minotaur struck him with a bolter held like a club, breaking the Lamenter's forearm. Selman changed hands and stabbed again. A second Minotaur fired from less than a meter away. The bolt entered Selman's abdomen and detonated inside his lower torso. The Lamenter's pelvis disappeared in a red eruption. He fell forward anyway, still trying to drive the knife deeper before another round opened his skull. "Take ammunition from everything that has hands," Imano ordered. There was no longer time for reverence. He pulled 2 magazines from a dead Minotaur and checked the pattern against his own weapon. Compatible. Good enough. Brother Chalice did the same. Chapter markings meant nothing to a bolt shell once it entered a magazine. Across the junction, Brother Cestus took a burst through the chest. The first shell cracked his cuirass. The second entered beneath the fracture and exploded against fused ribs. The third tore open one lung and shredded his primary heart. Cestus remained standing because his secondary heart was still functioning and his armor had locked around him. He braced himself against the doorway, blood pumping down his abdomen in thick sheets, and continued firing while Imano ordered the others back. "Move," Cestus said, voice wet through the vox. "I can purchase seconds." Chalice seized his shoulder. "Brother," Cestus struck his hand away. "Do not make me spend them arguing." Imano understood. They withdrew. Behind them Cestus fired in measured bursts until the sound became irregular, then single shots, then one last shot, then the hollow click of an empty weapon repeating until either his finger stopped moving or the Minotaurs reached him. The last major defensive line before the command approaches collapsed beneath Terminators. Minotaurs came through smoke with storm shields overlapping and thunderhammers raised, their armor so damaged that some were more black than bronze. The Lamenters met them at suicidal range because there was no space left in which to trade distance for time. Melter weapons fired from meters away and turned Terminator plate into glowing ruin. One Minotaur took a blast through the abdomen and folded around the incandescent hole while the warrior beside him advanced over the body. A Lamenter with a power sword lunged between 2 shields and cut through the inner elbow joint of a bronze Terminator, severing the arm carrying his hammer. The Minotaur answered by smashing the shield edge into the Lamenter's helm until the faceplate broke and blood flooded the cracked lenses. The yellow warrior kept fighting. He thrust again. A stormbolter fired into his side. His armor burst open. Part of his liver and intestine struck the wall. He remained upright long enough to bury the sword in the Terminator's groin seal before another hammer hit him from above and drove his body to the deck in a collapse of shattered spine, skull, and ceramite. The corridor became almost impossible to perceive as combat rather than industrial destruction involving living bodies. Thunderhammers demolished barricades and the men behind them with the same blows. Chainswords bit into shield rims and skipped into exposed joints. Bolt rounds detonated inside armor cavities, already open from earlier wounds, and sprayed fragments of organ tissue across warriors still fighting. A Minotaur lost his hand to a power blade and trapped the Lamenter's weapon beneath the stump before headbutting him until both helms cracked. Brother Chalice drove his chainsword through a bronze warrior's neck and nearly reached the spine before a shield impact threw him across the corridor. He landed beside Imano, rose instantly, and charged back without comment. A wounded Lamenter crawled beneath the melee because both legs had been crushed, pulled a crack grenade from his belt, and clamped it against the rear of a Terminator's knee. The blast destroyed them both. A Minotaur whose abdominal plate had split open continued advancing with coils of intestine hanging against one thigh, internal clotting slowing the blood loss just enough for him to fire until Imano put a bolt through the damaged seal. Another Lamenter took a thunderhammer strike to one shoulder that tore the arm free and collapsed half his ribcage, yet his remaining hand still found his bolt pistol and fired twice before his hearts failed. By then, blood ran so deeply across the deck that every footstep threw droplets against the walls. Imano had ceased hearing individual impacts. His helm compensated for concussive overload by reducing certain frequencies, turning the slaughter into a dull mechanical thunder beneath his own breathing. He saw Chalice kill another Minotaur. He saw Brother Acast fall with the back of his helm missing. He saw a yellow-armored warrior he did not recognize at all, thrust a melter charge into a shield wall, and disappear with the bronze warriors in the resulting fire. Then the defensive line was simply gone. Not broken in a glorious instant, not swept aside by one impossible blow, gone through subtraction. A brother fell, then another. A barricade collapsed. A shield crossed the place where a defender had stood. The Minotaurs moved forward until there were too few Lamenters left to define a line. Asterion Moloch entered the final command nexus through doors his tech marines had cut apart, rather than wait for the locking systems to surrender. The black spear remained in his hand. His storm shield was gouged, its field generator fluctuating after more impacts than the artificers who forged it had ever intended it to endure in one engagement. His Tartaros armor bore blackened sections where plasma had burned it, deep cuts from power weapons, and repaired fractures sealed during brief intervals between assaults. Blood had dried beneath one pauldron and begun leaking again. The command chamber beyond was almost empty. Dead serfs remained at stations shattered by fragments. 2 Lamenters lay beside the central hololithic pit, both killed before the Minotaurs entered. Moloch scanned once for Malakim Foros and found nothing. Chapter Master remains unconfirmed, an officer reported. No body recovered from the Daughter of Tempests. No command ident detected aboard the bark. Moloch stepped toward the damaged hololith. Then he is irrelevant to the present objective. The officer turned slightly. You do not wish a search prioritized? For one warrior while the chapter still resists? No, Lord. Then do not ask me again. Moloch had never required Foros's corpse to prove victory. A duel could settle pride. It could not seize ships, break companies, secure gene seed, or compel surrender. If Foros lived, he could be hunted later. If he had died, the void had already done the work. Either outcome changed nothing that mattered during the 17th hour. The surviving Lamenter commanders reached the same conclusion from the opposite side. What remained of Chapter Command, assembled not in a grand strategium, but through a fractured Vox conference, linking wounded officers aboard the bark with isolated surface leaders and the few ships that still answered. Some transmissions carried no image. Others appeared as distorted helm feeds, shaking beneath distant gunfire. The picture they built together was worse than any single battlefield report. The fleet was wrecked, captured, or immobilized. The Mater Lacrimarum had been penetrated almost to her deepest sanctums. Minotaurs controlled launch infrastructure and portions of propulsion. The gene seed stores were compromised. Surface forces had no unified extraction route. Foros remained missing. Ammunition was nearly exhausted across several formations. Continued resistance might kill more Minotaurs, perhaps hundreds, if every surviving Lamenter spent his life efficiently. It would not reverse the battle. It would only ensure that whatever remained of the chapter entered history as corpses. A wounded captain, whose helm feed showed one side of his face covered in blood, spoke first. "Then we die." Another officer answered, "And what does that accomplish?" "It denies them prisoners. It also denies us a future. We are Adeptus Astartes. We do not kneel." Imano listened from a ruined transit chapel, while Chalas watched the corridor. Only 4 warriors remained with them. "We have knelt before the Emperor," Imano said. Static hissed across the channel. "We have knelt before the memory of Sanguinius. Do not pretend the movement itself is shame. Shame is in what we surrender by doing it." The wounded captain snarled, "They will strip our plate from us." "Yes. They will take our weapons." "Yes. They will parade us as rebels." "Perhaps. Then you would choose humiliation." Imano looked at the yellow bodies around him, at brothers who had died to preserve vaults now in Minotaur hands, corridors now lost, and ships now burning. "I choose them. Explain." "The dead." No one spoke. Imano continued. "Numas died, so there would be Lamenters behind him. Cestus died, so there would be Lamenters behind him. Every brother who held a door, every pilot who burned, every wounded warrior left with a bolter across his knees, died because something was meant to survive his death. If we destroy ourselves now because captivity offends our pride, then we make their sacrifice meaningless. We are not required to win Optera. We are required to ensure there is still a chapter when Optera is nothing but a name in an archive. One officer whispered, "We may never recover." Imano looked toward Chalas. "Then our sons will inherit the attempt." The decision passed without ceremony. A surrender signal transmitted across every functioning frequency the Lamenters still possessed. For several seconds nothing changed. Then some guns stopped. Others did not. Isolated squads with dead Vox systems continued fighting because they never received the order. A group of Lamenters aboard a lower armory refused it after receiving it and charged the Minotaurs rather than disarm. They were killed to the last. On Optera IV, one wounded assault marine screamed that Sanguinius had not raised cowards and fired until concentrated bolter fire tore him apart. Elsewhere, yellow-armored warriors placed weapons on the ground, stepped back, and waited beneath the aim of bronze bolters. Minotaurs moved among them methodically. Bolters were taken first, sidearms followed, combat blades, grenades, and power weapons were removed. Armor systems capable of offensive discharge were disabled where practical. Apothecaries were separated from line brothers. Officers were identified. No Minotaur offered comfort. No one called them brothers. Moloch received the surrender from within the captured. Command Nexus. Confirmed across primary Lamenter channels, an officer reported. Resistance continues in isolated compartments. Terminate resistance. Prisoners? Disarm, segregate, account for all. Captured vessels? Secure them. Gene seed? Inventory. The officer hesitated. Do you wish to address the surviving Lamenters? Moloch looked at him. No. By the time the chronologium reached the end of the 17th hour, the living prisoners had been counted and recounted until the figure stabilized at 311 Lamenters in Minotaur custody. The Minotaurs had paid heavily for them. Bronze corpses remained across the bark, across captured ships, across the rocks of Optera, and frozen in the void between them. None of that altered the result. Imano knelt with the survivors inside a vast launch chamber whose ceiling remained blackened by fire. His armor was cracked, burned and stained so heavily that the yellow beneath could scarcely be seen. Blood had dried in the joints. One gauntlet belonged to another dead brother. His bolter was gone. His chainsword was gone. Around him, Lamenters sat or knelt beneath Minotaur guard, while medici teams separated those likely to die before transport. Chalas remained alive 3 warriors away, head bowed but spine straight. Bronze-armored figures moved among the dead. They removed weapons first, then ammunition, then anything judged worth preserving. A Minotaur bent over the corpse of a Lamenter and unclasped a power sword from the dead warrior's belt. Another dragged a crate of captured bolt magazines toward the armory teams. Fires still burned beyond the launch doors. The Mater Lacrimarum continued to groan around them, alive enough to be taken. Imano watched the Minotaurs strip the battlefield and understood that defeat possessed sounds of its own. Not gunfire, not screaming. Metal unclasped from dead hands. Weapons stacked upon decks. Boots approaching prisoners who no longer carried arms. The 17th hour ended. The Battle of Optera was over. The humiliation had only begun. Silence came to the Mater Lacrimarum slowly. It did not arrive when the surrender signal was transmitted, nor when the last organized Lamenters formation laid down its weapons, nor even when the final isolated defenders were killed in compartments where the Vox had failed. It came by subtraction. One bolter ceased firing, then another. A chainsword screamed somewhere beyond a sealed bulkhead and was suddenly still. Storm bolters answered for several seconds longer before falling silent in turn. At last, there remained only the sounds that warfare usually concealed. the groaning of wounded metal, the hiss of atmosphere escaping through imperfect seals, the distant crackle of fires feeding upon insulation and devotional hangings, and the endless tolling of damage alarms whose machine spirits had not been informed that there was no longer a battle to warn anyone about. Red lumen strips pulsed over corridors layered with the dead. Servitors moved among them with the mindless patience of insects crawling across carrion, dragging bodies from doorways, cutting weapons from locked gauntlets, and marking sections of armor for recovery. Mortal chapter serfs emerged from hiding places with hollow eyes and blood crusted beneath their noses, stepping carefully between warriors they had once regarded as demigods. Void-suited recovery teams crossed ruptured decks on maglines, disappearing through holes in the hull to retrieve Astartes corpses caught against antennae, gun housings, and torn superstructure. Beyond the armor glass, dead men still drifted among fragments of both chapters, yellow and bronze rendered equally small against the void. Imano watched the work without his helm. The Minotaurs had removed it with the rest of his weapons, but had not yet taken his warplate, perhaps because damaged armor was less urgent than blades, bolters, and functioning systems. The absence of the helmet made the air feel wrong against his face. It carried smoke and the smell of blood without filtration. He had forgotten how strong that smell could become when thousands died within enclosed metal. Brother Chalice sat nearby with his back against a launch bay support column, one hand resting uselessly across the rent in his breastplate. Neither spoke. Around them, surviving Lamenters occupied a cordoned section beneath bronze-armored guard, while Minotaur apothecaries and tech marines moved among corpses outside the perimeter. Every few minutes, another familiar body passed upon a grav sled. Imano knew most of them. That was the obscenity. He had served long enough that names had become tied to decades rather than battles. Brother Celadon had once stood beside him while an alien bioform tried to tear open a Thunderhawk hatch from the outside. Brother Helios had drunk watered wine with him after a campaign during which half their company had believed neither would see another sunrise. Captain Numus had corrected Imano's firing discipline more than a century before Optera, and later entrusted him with men of his own. Brother Tamaron had complained about the balance of a borrowed missile launcher less than an hour before Minotaur heavy bolters tore his skull apart. Brother Cestus had died holding a doorway because there had been no ammunition left for retreat. Whole squads existed now only as clusters of names in Imano's memory, their company markings meaningless because the companies themselves had been butchered into fragments. Gene seed recovery teams moved among them where progenoid glands remained intact. Sometimes an apothecary knelt, worked and rose with a sealed canister. Sometimes he moved on without one. A bolt round through the wrong place, a melter blast, a thunderhammer strike or prolonged fire could reduce centuries of genetic inheritance to tissue too ruined to salvage. Imano counted each failed recovery more carefully than he counted the dead. Alive, he felt almost indecent. A Minotaur serf approached a corpse near the prisoner line and unclasped a yellow pauldron whose bleeding heart device remained intact. The serf inspected it, placed it upon a cart, and moved to the next body. Farther down the bay, captured bolters had already been arranged into racks according to pattern and condition. Chainswords lay in separate piles. Power weapons were tagged by artificers. Inferno pistols and rarer relic weapons were carried away individually rather than thrown among standard arms. Damaged suits of Lamenters plate were stripped from the dead, where recovery was practical. Those too badly fused with bodies were marked for later cutting. The humiliation possessed an orderliness that battle had lacked. The Minotaurs inventoried victory. Across the bark, armories were opened beneath Techmarine supervision. Vehicles capable of repair were catalogued. Thunderhawks, too, damaged for immediate flight, were examined for usable engines, weapon systems, and machine cores. The Mater Lacrimarum herself had become the greatest prize,
her battered hull no longer treated as an enemy fortress, but as captured tonnage. Minotaur repair crews moved toward drives they had spent 17 hours trying to cripple, now laboring to preserve the same systems they had broken. The surviving structures of the Daughter of Tempests, scattered through the void after her catastrophic destruction, were claimed as wreckage and salvage, where recovery craft could reach them. Armor plates, cogitator cores, weapon assemblies and sealed compartments, large enough to tow, were marked beneath Minotaur authority. The Dawn Reaper, blood-soaked and taken through Encomi's boarding assault, lay wounded beneath guard, while bronze-armored warriors replaced Lamenter sentries at internal checkpoints. Nothing sacred remained sacred once catalogued. On the Minotaur vessels, victory looked little cleaner. Their apothecarians were full. Their armor decks overflowed with broken bronze plate. Mortals dragged blood from surgical floors, while gene seed canisters bearing Minotaur markings joined those recovered from enemy dead. Terminator Assault Squad Zelaos had entered Optera as a formation and emerged from it as a list of injuries. Porphio was gone into the void, his body never recovered after the hull breach tore him from the transfer spine. Colchis survived grievously wounded, his plate cut away, while apothecaries fought to preserve organs already failing beneath trauma. Lianius still lived, because Astartes were difficult things to kill, though what remained of him would never again carry Terminator armor as living flesh. His shattered body was already being considered for the sarcophagus and adamantium tomb of a dreadnought, where ruined nerves might one day command weapons larger than the limbs he had lost. Archlus had slain Captain Numus, and then died from the wounds Numus had given him, his primary and
secondary hearts failing one after the other, despite everything built into the physiology of a space marine to prevent precisely such an ending. Zelaos survived. The recognition given to him was brief. No feast, no procession through cheering serfs. His conduct at Optera was entered into chapter record. Authority granted during the collapse of other command structures became acknowledged rather than merely tolerated. The bloody mantle and the honors attached to his actions would follow. The dead did not rise to witness them. When Asterion Moloch reviewed the battle's cost, he did so in the same manner he had reviewed Cairo. The strategium table displayed losses in cold columns. Battle brothers killed, battle brothers wounded, Terminator plate destroyed or recoverable, assault craft lost, armored vehicles requiring forge reconstruction, void ships crippled, mortal crew casualties, gene seed recovered, gene seed unrecovered. The figures were severe enough that another commander might have stared at them and wondered whether victory had been worth purchasing. Moloch did not wonder. Beside the losses appeared the results. The Lamenters had ceased to function as an active chapter formation within the Badab War. Their principal forces at Optera were dead, wounded, or imprisoned. Their fleet strength had been shattered. Their great bark had fallen. Their weapons and armor were being seized. Their gene seed had been compromised and partially captured. Surviving vessels were under enemy control or too badly damaged to matter. 311 Lamenters remained prisoners. 17 hours. Moloch studied the exchange without visible satisfaction, because satisfaction was irrelevant. An officer stood opposite him. Our casualties exceed the estimates prepared before engagement. They do. The armory will require extensive replenishment. It will. The chapter will not recover immediately. Moloch looked toward the tactical record of Optera. Neither will they. The officer bowed his head. That concluded the matter. Search operations for Malakim Foros continued longer than Moloch considered tactically useful. Minotaur recovery teams examined wreckage from the Daughter of Tempests, searched surviving compartments, interrogated cogitator records, and compared recovered bodies against the physical markers known to belong to the Lamenters chapter master. They found dead officers. They found armor fragments carrying command-grade ornamentation. They recovered burned ceramite, pieces of heraldry, and bodies so catastrophically damaged that identification became uncertain even to apothecaries. They did not recover evidence sufficient to declare Foros conclusively dead. The report reached Moloch during preparations to leave the system. No confirmed remains, the officer said. Probability? High that he died in the destruction. Confirmation? None. Moloch considered that for a moment. Record him missing. Nothing more. Somewhere within the ruined mathematics of Optera, an uncertainty remained. The Lamenters did not know it. Their prisoners knew only the locks. Minotaur armorers stripped them in groups beneath armed guard. Warplate was opened at the seals and removed piece by piece, yellow ceramite leaving scarred flesh exposed to the cold air of the containment decks. For an Astartes, armor was more than protection. It was interface, history, identity, and the physical expression of his place within the chapter. Imano felt lighter without it and hated the sensation. Old scars across his chest and shoulders became visible. So did the wounds the plate had concealed. Chalice stood beside him wearing only a black body glove, the scale of his injuries suddenly more obvious without ceramite to give him the silhouette of invulnerability. Their captors had taken everything. Bolters, blades, grenades, helms, company colors. Even damaged pieces of armor were tagged and removed. 311 prisoners were transferred from the battle zone under Minotaur guard. The figure passed through the surviving Lamenters in murmurs and then stopped mattering because no one knew which names belonged inside it until transports were fully assembled. Fewer than 100 brothers were believed to have been elsewhere when Moloch closed the trap around Optera. Whether those distant survivors could rebuild anything worthy of the name chapter was a question none of the prisoners could answer. Their destination was a prison hulk in orbit of Sagan II. The transport did not resemble an honor guard for defeated Astartes. Restraint systems lined reinforced compartments. Weapons ports covered every angle. Minotaur sentries watched from behind barriers designed to withstand transhuman strength. The Lamenters were separated into manageable groups so that no surviving officer could gather enough brothers for a meaningful uprising. Wounded prisoners were given enough treatment to survive the journey where practical. Those judged beyond saving were still guarded until death. Imano and Chalas sat opposite one another during the first translation preparations. For a long time, neither spoke. At last, Chalas said, 311. Imano nodded. Enough? The question had no need of explanation. Imano looked at his bare hands. They seemed wrong without gauntlets. I do not know. Chalas leaned his head against the bulkhead. We should have died. Imano looked up. Chalas did not sound proud or ashamed, only tired. Perhaps, Imano said. Do you regret it? Imano thought of Cestus in the doorway, Numas beneath the thunderhammer, the wounded brothers left with bolters across their knees, the apothecaries dying before the gene seed vaults, the warriors who had surrendered because Imano had argued that survival gave meaning to sacrifice. No. Chalas closed his eyes. Neither do I. There was no oath of vengeance, no promise that they would return stronger, no certainty that the Imperium would forgive them. They did not know of penitent crusades, future absolution, or what further catastrophes waited beyond captivity. They knew only that they had once possessed ships, banners, armor, and companies, and now possessed bodies and names. For the moment, that had to be enough. Asterion Moloch departed Optera before the last fires were extinguished. His fleet did not remain to admire the wreckage. Reports were already arriving regarding subsequent operations, enemy concentrations, repair priorities, and the demands of the wider Badab conflict. Bronze vessels changed formation around captured and crippled prizes, while tugcraft secured salvage. On the Strategium, Optera diminished from active battlefield to completed objective. A Minotaur officer approached with a new tactical packet. Orders from Theatre Command. Moloch accepted the data. Another world, another enemy disposition, another set of numbers requiring reduction. Behind him, the hololithic record of Optera remained visible for several seconds longer before a surf closed the display. Cairo had burned because its mines were useful to Huron. Optera had burned because the Lamenters were useful to Huron. To Moloch, the distinction was minor. He had not hated the soldiers in the mines. He had not hated the sons of Sanguinius. Hatred would have made the violence personal. Moloch had made it necessary. That was worse. From the prison transport, Optera became smaller behind armor glass, thick enough to survive weapons fire. Imano stood where the guards permitted him and watched the ruined system recede. Fires still moved across the surface of the world below. Wrecked ships reflected distant starlight. The Mater Lacrimarum remained visible among Minotaur vessels, wounded, captured, and no longer theirs. Somewhere aboard a bronze ship, or inside one of the armory holds being prepared for departure, lay a battered yellow helm. The bleeding heart remained painted upon it. Black and white checkers still crossed one side. Perhaps the warrior who had worn it was dead. Perhaps he knelt somewhere aboard the same prison transport, without knowing where his armor had gone. It no longer mattered to those who possessed it. The Minotaurs would catalogue it, store it, or strip it for whatever value remained. Imano watched the last lights of Optera diminish until the void swallowed them. The Lamenters had not been exterminated. That would have been simpler. They had been defeated, disarmed, imprisoned, and robbed of the instruments through which an Adeptus Astartes chapter expressed its existence. Their fleet had been broken. Their armor had been taken. Their brothers were dead. Their chapter master was missing. Their future had been reduced to fewer warriors than some chapters committed to a single campaign. Asterion Moloch had never needed to kill every Lamenter. He had only needed to destroy the Lamenters who came to Optera.
Thank you, brothers, for watching tonight's Warhammer video. I hope you guys enjoyed some of the lore that we covered about the Badab War. As always, before we get going, be sure to like and comment the videos and topics you want to see. And be sure to check out the merch in the description below. And subscribe for the Emperor.
Brothers, the Emperor demands you ready for battle. Reinforce your war gear at Lawhammer.store with fresh grimdark apparel, accessories, and collectibles worthy of any loyal servant of the Imperium or agent of chaos. New collections emerge from the warp regularly, with new designs constantly joining the armory. The Emperor protects. Lawhammer provides the gear. Gear up and join the crusade at Lawhammer.store.